Okay. Good morning and welcome to the December 2014 meeting of the Federal Communications Commission. Madam Secretary, a graduate of the university that clawed their way into the Final Four, would you care to...
That's what we do.
Would you care to tell us about the schedule for today?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning to you and good morning, Commissioner. For today's meeting, you will hear 3 items for your consideration. First, you will consider a second report in order, an order on reconsideration in docket number 13184, and a report in order in docket number 1090 to close the school and library connectivity gap by adjusting program rules and support levels in order to meet long-term program goals for high-speed connectivity to and within all eligible schools and libraries. Second, you will consider a report in order finalizing decisions necessary to proceed to Phase 2 of the Connect America Fund. Third, you will consider a public notice that asks for comment on the detailed procedures necessary to carry out the broadcast incentive auction. The public notice includes specific proposals on auction design issues such as determination of the initial clearing target, opening bid prices, and the final television channel assignment process. This is your agenda for today. The first item will be presented by the Wireline Competition Bureau and the Office of the Managing Director. It is entitled Modernizing the E-Rate Program for Schools and Libraries, and John Wilkins, the Managing Director, will give the introduction.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Mr. Wilkins.
Excuse me, we need to have Title II on the agenda. We need to guarantee net neutrality because democracy depends on equal treatment.
Mr. Wilkins, you want to proceed?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Commissioners. We're going to divide the E-rate presentation into 2 parts this morning. First, staff from the Wireline Bureau will join me to present the item before you today. And then following the staff presentation, to provide some more context for the item, we will hear brief remarks from several education and library experts on the importance of high-speed connectivity for schools and libraries, and more importantly, the students and the library patrons they serve. So before we present the item, I want to introduce our guests. First, probably most importantly, you can see sitting behind me numerous students, teachers, principals, technology staff, and administrators from local schools, as well as from several libraries in the region. We just had a great chat with them before this meeting, and they were peppering us with questions, and I think they're eager to hear more about the item today. And here at the table, I'm pleased to be joined by several leaders who will speak firsthand to the importance of what today's actions mean for those who stand to benefit from E-rate modernization. So first, all the way from Huntsville, Arkansas,
keep going.
We will hear from Daisy Dewar, principal of the St. Paul Public Schools. After Principal Dewar, Dr. Dallas Dance, superintendent of the Baltimore County Public Schools, will speak, joined by Ms. Courtney Warlick, who's a teacher at Hawthorne Elementary in Baltimore County. Next, from right here in the nation's capital, we'll hear from Ms. Valencia Hawkins, a 5th grade teacher at Ann Beers Elementary. And hitting cleanup for the group will be Richard Reyes-Galvin, Executive Director of the D.C. Public Library. Thank all of you very much for joining us. So, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, today we present you with a second report in order and an order on reconsideration that will further modernize the schools and libraries' Universal Service Support Mechanism, also known as the E-rate program. Since 1998, E-rate has provided financial support to schools and libraries in every state, every territory of the country, to assist schools and libraries in securing affordable Internet connectivity and related services. In July, the Commission took the first major step in modernizing E-rate to better meet the needs of 21st century students and library patrons. Then the Commission adopted a report and order and a notice of proposed rulemaking that established goals and measures for E-rate, refocused the program squarely on broadband, and ensured that funding will be available for internal connections to support broadband within schools and libraries. This order is the next major step in the modernization process. The order was drafted and refined by the Wireline Competition Bureau, working closely with the Office of Strategic Planning and Policy Analysis, the Office of Managing Director, the Office of General Counsel, and the Office of Native Affairs and Policy. In addition to those to the table, I'd like to acknowledge Kate Dumichel and Sean Conway for their work on the order, James Bachtel and Chaz Eberly for their work on the order on reconsideration, and everyone on the slide, very large team of staff who have worked tirelessly on E-rate modernization. So joining me, Julie Veach, Chief of the Bureau, also at the table, the Chief of the Office of Strategic Planning, Jonathan Chambers, the Associate Bureau Chief in the Bureau, Trent Harkrader, from the Bureau's Telecommunications Access Policy Division, Deputy Chief Lisa Hone, and Attorney Advisor Brian Boyle, who will present the item. Brian.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners.
Good morning, Brian.
I am very pleased to present the next step in modernizing the E-rate program, which has successfully helped schools and libraries get access to modern communications networks for the last 17 years. Less than 6 months ago, the Commission adopted a landmark order that, among other things, reformed the program to better promote connectivity within schools and libraries. This order takes additional steps to ensure high-speed broadband connectivity to schools and libraries, particularly schools and libraries in rural areas. First, the order provides additional flexibility for schools and libraries seeking to purchase affordable, high-speed broadband connections. Specifically, to provide applicants more options to pay for non-recurring construction costs, it suspends USAC's multi-year amortization policy and allows applicants to pay the non-discount portion of non-recurring construction costs over multiple years. Beginning in funding year 2016, it also equalizes program rules for lit and dark fiber and allows E-rate applicants to self-construct high-speed broadband facilities when self-construction is the most cost-effective option, with appropriate safeguards consistent with rules already applicable to the Commission's Healthcare Connect Fund. It also provides an additional discount of up to 10% to match state funding for self-construction charges for last-mile facilities, with special consideration to tribal schools and libraries, and also requires recipients of high-cost funding to offer high-speed broadband to schools and libraries located in the geographic area where the provider receives high-cost support at rates reasonably comparable to similar services in urban areas. Next, the order addresses the E-rate program's ongoing funding needs. It increases the predictability of funding for connectivity within schools and libraries by expanding the 5-year budget approach for Category 2 internal connections through funding year 2019. It also provides an adjustment of the per square foot budget for Wi-Fi in urban libraries to account for their different usage profiles. To ensure that schools and libraries have sufficient funding to achieve program goals, the order increases the E-rate funding cap by $1.5 billion to $3.9 billion, plus annual inflationary changes. The order also directs USAC to establish a performance management system to assess the effectiveness of the program's administration. Finally, the order on reconsideration adopts a more inclusive definition of rural so that a school or library located in an area with a population of less than 25,000 will be considered rural to ensure that additional funding is targeted to areas where E-rate supported services are more costly. It also dismisses petitions seeking reconsideration of the Commission's 10-year document retention rule, the immediate phase-out of support for voice components, and the decision not to allow multi-year or conditional commitments. It further clarifies the cost-effectiveness test for individual data plans and the cost allocation requirements for circuits carrying voice services. The Bureau recommends adoption of this item and requests editorial privileges.
Okay, thank you, Brian. And we'll just now turn it over to our guest, starting with Principal Dewar.
Chairman Wheeler, the people are asking for a full accounting.
Hi, my name is Daisy Dyer-Dewar, and I'm super excited to be here.
Daisy, you can just hang on one second here, because I don't want what you have to say is important, and we want to make sure that we hear you.
Okay.
Thank you, Daisy.
Oh,
Go ahead.
my.
We're asking for Title II consideration. We're saying keep the net neutral, keep the net neutral, keep the net neutral. This is what the president wants. This is what the people want. We paid for the net. We deserve to have the net kept neutral. We want the internet kept neutral. We're sorry we're interrupting your meeting, but this is a very important issue for the American people. Keep the net neutral.
Ms. Dewar, if you could just hold for a second. There's a lot of students here in the audience right now. You've just seen the First Amendment at work, and this is what this country is all about. Ms. Dewar, please go ahead.
Hi, my name is Daisy Dyer Dewar, and I am the principal at St. Paul Public Schools in rural Arkansas. And just to give you guys an idea of rural, and I heard him say the definition of 25,000 or more, which I thought to myself, well, then everybody in Arkansas is going to be rural. But just to give you my definition of rural, it takes us about an hour to get to a Walmart Supercenter, so we're really rural in Arkansas. So I want to tell my story just to give you guys an idea of how important the connectivity really is to rural schools. 3 years ago, when I was hired as the principal of St. Paul Public Schools, which is a K-12 school with about 230 people enrolled, so it's very small. We were a failing school. We were on year 2 of school improvement, and we were looking at possibly being shut down by the state of Arkansas. And we were basically the biggest employer in the community and the only thing holding the community in town together. When I was hired, we got all of our stakeholders together, all of our students, our staff, our community, and we had to make a decision on what we were going to do to change things, because outcomes, what we were doing wasn't working. You know, if you keep on the hamster wheel and it doesn't work, you've got to do something different. So we came up with 2 things, relationships and technology. We were going to infuse technology into our school. And so we decided that was going to be what we did. Now, I'm going to tell you, I promised him we were going to do that, and I had no idea on how we were going to get the technology, because my district had already said, Daisy, you got to fix this stuff, but you got no money. So I went from that point, and we all worked together, and we did amazing things. We infused all kinds of devices, and it was through grants, and it was through all different types of connections I was able to make because of being a connected educator. And one of my biggest struggles has been bandwidth. And I've had to lobby our state and lobby through a lot of different connections. But since 3 years ago of doing these different initiatives, bringing in blended learning, bringing in flipped classroom, bringing in different people from all over the country to our school through different ways, Google Hangouts, different types of things, we've gone from being 3 years ago a failing school to now being a top 10% school in Arkansas. We're recognized as a model school by Dr. Daggett and the ICLE. We're the school that people come to Nowhere, Arkansas to see what we're doing. And that's the amazing thing that technology infused with those relationships has done for us. And I just am so excited that we're going to now have the ability to have that type of connectivity to all different schools. Because not every school has a little bulldog fighting for them. And we need every school and every student to be able to have that connectivity. And there's a reason that 17% of rural students are getting 4-year degrees with low socioeconomic. And I don't know if I mentioned this or not, but we're over 80% free and reduced lunch on top of everything else. So that urban population that's just like us, 34% of them are getting 4-year degrees. And it's all about accessibility. Because if you're going to go be a deep sea diver, you probably need to know how to swim. And our kids haven't even had access to anything. So we've got to throw them out in the water and give them that accessibility. And that's what you guys are doing today, is giving them accessibility. And I'm so proud and so excited to be part of something like that. And because I've had the ability to be connected with great organizations like NASSP and All for Ed and all of the amazing different initiatives that are going on, I've been fortunate to give my students all these great things. But now with this E-rate, and what you're doing now, all students are going to have that ability. And I'm just really, really excited and proud. And thank you so much.
Well, thank you. And we're glad the Bulldog's here. Dr. Dance?
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Wheeler, fellow commissioners. It's such an honor to be here again with you today to talk about such an important program in our country. This is all about equitable access for students all across our nation. I've had an opportunity to serve in leadership capacities in suburban, urban, and rural areas, and this is not a decision that's just based on one area alone. It's all of our kids. Right now, I serve as the superintendent in Baltimore County Public Schools, which is the 25th largest school system in our country. We have 173 school centers and programs, roughly 19,000 employees, and almost half of our students qualify for free or reduced lunch. When I began literally back in 2012, I saw the inequities across our entire school system, which almost spans literally 700 square miles. I saw technology in some schools where there was so much that we almost had technology in boxes because certain PTAs were able to afford that. Then I saw some schools where there was no technology at all. Such an inequity cannot exist, particularly in Baltimore County, but it should not exist across our country. And so it's exciting that we're here today because in Baltimore County, we adopted Blueprint 2.0, which really called for a bold theory of action that says every single kid, regardless of where they live, the community they're in, their socioeconomic status, it doesn't matter. Every single kid needed to have an equitable access to digital learning environment, regardless, point blank. But then we also wanted to make sure all of our students had access to learning a second language prior to graduation. But we realized that couldn't happen unless we leveraged technology. So we were really excited around what you're ready to do with E-rate this morning. We know that in Baltimore County, E-rate is allowing us the opportunity to correct our infrastructure. When we look at the fact that almost half of our schools, over 80% of our schools are more than 40 years or older, we have to make sure that our students can get online every single day without any issues. We also recognize the fact that our students have access to Wi-Fi at Starbucks and at McDonald's, but it does not exist in our nation's classrooms. That can't exist. But in Baltimore County Public Schools, because we've opened up access to technology for all of our students now, and we're continuing that work, we've seen data points that really strive to the fact that this is working. So we have 10 lighthouse schools. We're going down the path, what we're calling STAT, students and teachers accessing tomorrow. You're going to hear from Courtney Warlick, one of our teachers in one of our lighthouse schools in a little while. But we've seen discipline referrals in our schools go down at literally 80% because students are engaged now through leveraging technology. We've seen the opportunity to progress monitor students, particularly because we've been able to do online assessments and get real-time data so that teachers can actually adjust instruction on the fly for young people. We've also seen at our high school level where in 1 year our graduation rate went from 84% to 86.3%. The achievement gap and the graduation gap for students of color, particularly male students of color, literally decreased by about 15% because we were opening up access to online credit recovery for young people at school and at home. But we've also seen, and this is what I really, really like, we've been talking about college and career-ready skills for our students. We've been able to partner with the Community College of Baltimore County to make sure that we have online dual enrollment opportunities for young people that they're able to take during the day because we have access to broadband within our classrooms. So I commend you on your leadership, on your time, and your attention for just allowing us to be here this morning and for to participate in such a historic moment. I am able to have two of our individuals hear from us from Baltimore County. You will hear from Courtney Warlick in one moment, who's a teacher at Hawthorne Elementary School, again, one of our 10 lighthouse schools. I also have Jessica Warden, who's one of our STAT teachers. We recognize that professional development must exist in our classrooms with our teachers if we want this to be possible with leveraging technology. And while Jessica's not speaking today, I do want to have an opportunity to recognize her for her service and to introduce Courtney Warlick, one of the teachers at Hawthorne Elementary School.
Thank you, Dr. Dance.
Thank you.
Ms. Warlick.
Good morning. It is an honor to be here. Opportunities to discover, plan, and prepare with my grade level team and STAT teacher are fueled daily with excitement. Just imagine, in our room you will see small groups of students crowded around to collaborate and share their newest findings. A student listening and viewing a whole group lesson that just needed to be seen again. Look a little closer into a learner-centered environment where digital journals are living and accessible to other students, teachers, and parents. Students are recording, listening, and critiquing their fluency and setting goals to become more fluent, expressive, and accurate readers. I'm sure you could see all of the students, their locations in the classroom, and the devices being utilized in effective ways. However, I must caution you, there is one thing that you cannot see or hear. There is one thing that runs so thick through the classrooms, it is something you feel. Something that gives you goosebumps and brings tears to your eyes. This one thing is the joy of learning. I have never felt more connected to my colleagues, my parents, and most importantly, my students. From the bottom of my heart and the hearts of those 8-year-olds that teach me something new every day, we, the teachers, parents, and students, are truly accessing tomorrow. The possibilities are endless. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Worley. Ms. Hawkins.
Yes. Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for providing me the opportunity to tell you my story. I am a former DCPS student. I'm a teacher at Ann Beers, the school that I attended as a child, and both of my children also attended there. So I'm very invested in education. With the support of DC Public Schools, and thanks to the introduction of blended learning from the City Bridge Foundation, I am continually revising the blended environment in my class. 2 years ago, I restructured my classroom into a 3-group station rotation. Within 2 months, the performance of my students increased markedly. Last year, I used more online programs for success. I had students of varying academic and, surprisingly to me, social needs. Having access to the internet inspired my students to not only invest in their own learning, but I believe helped my students become more self-regulating. The more I facilitate a blended approach, the more I feel compelled to do more. As a seasoned teacher, this is exhausting, but moreover, it's invigorating. It's given new life to me as a teacher. I give my students a mix of technology and small group instruction. Thanks to online access, online programs, most of them free, not only am I able to customize lessons for my students can customize lessons for themselves. I do not teach children. Access to an online world helps me facilitate instruction. Technology and the web have changed just about everything relating to what I knew about education and learning. The internet has obliterated my classroom walls. Students can drive their own learning and to connect to academic resources outside of Beers walls to create and share authentic, meaningful learning experiences. All of this has caused questions to change. For me, what is learning? What does it mean to be literate in a network-connected world? What does it mean to be educated? What do my students need to know? Today, more than ever, I can facilitate instruction that is not only personalized or differentiated, but additionally accessible for diverse levels of abilities of my students. The potential of virtual opportunities to promote and support student learning is inarguable. DC Public Schools is at the forefront, expanding the classroom environment beyond the traditional brick-and-mortar school. Chancellor Kaya Henderson has said that she wants DCPS to be the district that is leading the country in ways in which teachers draw on technology in the classroom. Every one of the 111 schools in DCPS has access to the great blended learning programs that, when used with fidelity, have been able to improve student learning. DCPS is well on the way. Take, for example, Ketchum and Randall Highlands Elementary, both represented here today. They both have implemented school-wide blended learning models, which means their students are using computers for at least 50% of the day. These schools have seen tremendous gains in student proficiency. In fact, both of these schools, students' proficiency grew by at least 10 percentage points after implementing the school-wide blended learning programs. Both schools admit they are not where they need to be, but the progress is incredible, and coupled with quality instruction and access, the pieces are in place to continue growing. In addition to these schools, teachers across and throughout DCPS have begun to implement various models and approaches to utilize internet connectivity, which integrates well-crafted instruction, digital playlists, in-depth research projects, and adaptive prescriptive online programs and the like. It is because of what takes place in the virtual neighborhood of the classroom that my students and students across the city continue learning in the libraries next door, the rec centers a few blocks away. Access to the internet enables all of us to cultivate students into 21st century learners. In essence, to quote Secretary of Education Arnie Duncan, access to uninterrupted broadband-enabled technology in the classroom will create 21st century learning experiences using 21st century technology. Because of the broadband technology in schools, my students, as well as other students, will be prepared to achieve success on a global scale. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hawkins. Mr. Gallo.
Good morning, Chairman Wheeler and fellow commissioners. I'd like to thank you for giving me a few minutes to talk about how access to high-speed internet in public libraries benefits all the district's residents, from the most vulnerable populations who rely on the library's technology for basic human services such as applying for health benefits and communicating with loved ones, to sophisticated users who are taking advantage of technology-rich spaces to co-work, collaborate, and innovate. Back in April, the Institute of Museum and Library Services hosted a public hearing on libraries and broadband at the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial Library. In my welcoming remarks, I said that the world has lost its patience with those who cannot navigate the online universe. You can't take an SAT or GED exam without access. You can't apply for jobs. You can't apply to schools. Many of us take this access for granted. Too many of us cannot, and that's one of the reasons public libraries are busier today than they've ever been. High-speed internet is a fundamental building block of digital readiness. It is the alphabet of digital literacy. Several years ago, the D.C. Public Library received funding through the Federal Broadband Technology Opportunities Program, BTOP. We participated in a large-scale digital readiness initiative that resulted in over 1,600 residents being trained on everything from PCs for beginners to A+ certification. Based on survey responses, our public training partner, Byteback, estimated that almost half of those residents were unemployed when they registered. Ultimately, one-third of that group found employment thanks to the training that they'd received. In July, the Washington Post published a story about a 69-year-old man who was set on rebuilding his life after 40 years of incarceration. With few other places to turn, he began taking computer classes at the MLK Library. He learned to apply for jobs online, and now he's fully employed at the University of the District of Columbia. D.C. Public Library partners with the D.C. Department of Corrections to offer a video visitation program that allows families to connect virtually when physical visits are not possible. The bandwidth required to support video conferencing is significant, and the program wouldn't be possible without high-speed internet. Of course, high-speed internet in public libraries doesn't only benefit the unemployed or those with low levels of computer literacy. Increasingly, thanks to the emerging technologies and collaborative workspaces in buildings like MLK, libraries are now attracting users on the opposite end of the digital readiness spectrum. Entrepreneurs, innovators, and inventors are making excellent use of our recently opened digital commons on projects and programs that would have been unfathomable just a few years ago. Last year, a local inventor used one of the library's 3D printers to create a prototype of a simple device designed to ensure privacy by covering a laptop's camera. He submitted his prototype to a reality television show on which he eventually appeared, and that helped boost sales of his product tremendously. MLK also hosts the DC Tech Meetup, a monthly gathering of hundreds of technologists who gather to pitch ideas, demonstrate new products, and network with potential collaborators and funders. Without high-speed internet, we could not support the technical demands of such a large-scale event. I'll close with one last word on the MLK Library. We are in the beginning stages of renovating the 43-year-old building to turn it into one of the most exciting, inviting, and technology-rich destinations for learning in the entire country. The city has budgeted over $200 million for the project, which we know will have a profound impact on the lives of the residents of the district. I can't tell you what the broadband requirements will be for a building that will be getting 4,000 visitors a day, but I know they will be overwhelming. In order to provide the infrastructure for the services that our residents need, we will need your help and applaud your efforts thus far. Thank you very much.
Thank you. To everybody sitting on that long table, those of you who are on the front lines making things work and making a difference, and to our colleagues at the Commission who have brought this program along and so far, thank you to all of you. Commissioner Clyburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Superintendent Dance, Principal Diadora. Welcome from Arkansas. I'm a fellow Southerner. You know, I had to put that in. Stat Teacher Warwick, Lead Teacher Hawkins, and Director Reyes-Gavilan, and of course the students. Welcome to the FCC, and thank you for this morning's presentations. You have reaffirmed how truly connected schools and libraries can enable customized teaching and planning, unprecedented academic gains, and 21st century relevance for users of our centers of learning. The reasons I've been an unwavering supporter of this item, which I proudly launched by circulating a notice of proposed rulemaking for my colleagues' consideration in July of last year, can be summed up in two ways. I grew up in a household in South Carolina where everyone except me spent some time or all of their careers either in a classroom or in a library setting. My parents, both sisters, my aunts, and a host of relatives viewed education as the best tool for upward mobility, so much so that they made personal commitments and, at times, economic sacrifices directly helping to shape and mold young minds. I still get stopped by people who say that while they may have cut every other class at C.A. Brown High School, they never considered missing James Clyburn's class because he not only made history interesting, he made sure that they knew that there would be a price to pay if they failed to show. Younger adults sing praises about my middle high school sister and teacher, Jennifer Reed, and my aunts, Maddie Wadley and the late Vivian Hilton Clyburn, crediting them for playing roles in their current success. So today, I'm passionate. I'm passionate about being a conduit for enhanced educational opportunities for all. So this is not new or trivial for me. It is completely woven into my personal fabric. All of these people in my lives and all of you would be moved like I was by getting to know a little bit about the weekly experiences of a young man named Josie Cabrera, a high school sophomore in the Bronx, New York. After school, Joey walks to Clawson Point Library to complete his homework and to do what so many other teenagers and a few adults do, connect with their friends on social media. While that library closes either at 6 or 7 during the bulk of the school week, he sits on the steps near the doors and tries desperately to get a faint Wi-Fi signal until sunset, when it is safe to still walk home. Two things were made immediately clear for me by this New York Times story. One, it was written before daylight savings time because sunset is now before 5 p.m. And two, like an estimated 2.9 million other New Yorkers, Joey is stuck in the digital dock, forced like too many others to sit outside in parking lots to get free access to broadband and Wi-Fi for better educational, employment, healthcare, and e-commerce opportunities, or to engage through social media because of the lack of connectivity at home. I honestly believe this statement more than anything, that broadband is the greatest equalizer of our time, but this only holds true if everyone has access. High poverty schools and libraries in most rural areas will never have comparable resources to their most or more affluent counterparts. This is why visionaries in Congress, including Senators Rockefeller and Markey and former Senator Snowe, can be proud of this item today. They recognized early on that access to world-class technology is needed to succeed, and as the lead agency, the FCC realizes that only through a modernized E-rate will we be able to enable schools and libraries and communities to have access to world-class broadband. This is potentially life-changing for communities too often relegated to minimally adequate educational opportunities, old books, and outdated technologies. As we prepare to vote on this item, it is equally important for us not to view this through a narrow lens, but for me as a three-legged stool, where all pieces need to be present for success. Broadband at school, broadband in the library, and broadband at home. Absent one leg, the stool does not stand. There are many positive aspects about this order that help to achieve our goals, but I want to highlight two in particular. First, I am pleased that it will increase the per square foot allocation for Wi-Fi in urban libraries to $5. In July, when the Commission voted to approve the reforms to the internal connections for Wi-Fi, I raised concerns that the proposed $1 per square foot for all libraries was too low. I appreciated the chairman's willingness to address this by increasing the per square foot allocation for libraries to $2.30. But the record in response to the July further notice made clear that such allocation was not sufficient for urban libraries, which may account for only 5% of the nation's Wi-Fi, but boosts 65% of the total public Wi-Fi use. So I am delighted that we increased the allocation to ensure that the libraries have robust Wi-Fi to satisfy demand. Second, I am pleased that the item implements the expectations from the 2011 USF ICC transformation orders. Excuse me, I'm going to get a little technical here, so I might lose you. The eligible telecommunications carriers, especially if I cannot talk, I will lose you, offer broadband to community anchor institutions, including schools and libraries. For too long, the FCC has viewed this universal service program in silos, failing to leverage efficiencies that could be gained coordinating across our entire universal service program platform. So for this reason, I advocated for the inclusion of the expectations that those eligible telecommunications carriers serve community anchor institutions in that transformation order, something that the Commission unanimously supported but has largely been idle on paper until today. It is the right thing to do. We should leverage our universal programs to extend the reach of each universal service dollar. The order leaves open the question of how those ETCs should connect other community anchor institutions, with the Commission defined also to include medical and healthcare providers, public safety entities, community colleges and other institutions of higher education, as well as organizations and agencies that provide outreach, access, equipment, and support services to facilitate greater use of broadband service by vulnerable populations, including low income, the unemployed, and the aged. The FCC has universal service programs devoted to rural health care and low-income populations, and it is good governance to extend the reach of each universal service dollars here. To the extent entities in rural high-cost areas receive support to build and maintain broadband-enabled networks, I strongly encourage the chairman to direct the staff to evaluate how better to leverage these programs. So this is directed at little Taylor Johns. Where are you, Taylor? Are you here, Taylor? Taylor, you scared? And for the one of the panelists who talked about, I believe it was you, Director, uninterrupted broadband. If I didn't attribute it right, take credit for it anyway. This item makes major and long-awaited strides, but we will not completely fulfill our vision of ensuring world-class educational opportunities for all unless everyone has access to all three legs of that broadband stool. So reforming the FCC's Lifeline program is key to this and should also be a major priority for the Commission, for schools, for libraries, and the educational community. For absent the ability to close the affordability gap for broadband everywhere, the laudable reforms we are poised to launch today will not completely bring Joey and others like him out of the digital darkness. I want to thank all of you, and I want to especially thank the dedicated team of the Wireline Competition Bureau, the Office of Managing Director, and the Office of Strategic Planning for their tireless work on this item. Well done, little bulldogs, well done. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Clyburn. Commissioner Rosenworcel.
Right. In schools across the country, December means more than the start of the holiday season. It's when first semester classes come to an end. That means students taking tests and teachers winding down instruction as the calendar year comes to a close. It's also time to wind down analog era education. The teaching tools so many of us, myself included, knew in class years ago, from the blackboard to the bulky textbook, are no longer the only essential instruments of education. We know this intuitively. That's because broadband and connected devices are changing every aspect of our lives. So many of our social spaces are now virtual. Plus, the combined power of mobility and cloud computing means we can take content with us wherever we go. All this change does not simply stop at the school doors. So if we are smart, we will let it in, wrestle with its potential, and do good things. Because doing anything else will not prepare our students for the world they live in, and it will deny them the digital skills they need to compete. The good news is we have E-Rate. We can use this program to help put classrooms and libraries across the country on course for digital age learning in the new year. But to do this, we need a better and bolder E-Rate for the future, what I like to call E-Rate 2.0. Now, E-Rate is the nation's largest education technology program, and it helps schools and libraries in every state by supporting access to modern communications and the internet. E-Rate was launched nearly 2 decades ago when the internet was known as the information superhighway. The program was the bipartisan brainchild of Senator Jay Rockefeller, former Senator Olympia Snowe, and then Congressman, now Senator, Ed Markey. And thanks to E-Rate, more than 95% of the classrooms in this country are now connected to the internet. While this sounds good, the challenge today is no longer connection, it's capacity. Too many of our schools and libraries that rely on E-Rate, often in low-income and rural communities, access the internet at speeds as low as 3 megabits. That means too many schools are unable to offer high-definition streaming video, take advantage of the most innovative teaching tools, or provide modern science, technology, engineering, and math, those STEM skills, again, that are so essential to compete. But we can fix this. Here at the FCC, we started the process of upgrading the E-Rate program last summer. We refocused it on broadband capacity and streamlined the application process. Now, that's a good start. But to take this program to the next level and truly make it modern, we have to take a fresh look at funding for the digital age. The E-Rate program was capped 16 years ago at $2.25 billion a year. That was a long time ago. It was when gas was $1 a gallon. It was when the price of a new home was 45% less than it is today. That means that E-Rate funding has not kept pace with inflation, shortchanging our students and cutting its purchasing power by billions. Think about that. At a time when digital skills are an essential part of preparing students for the modern economy, one of our most effective programs is frozen in the age of dial-up. Today's order rights this wrong. It raises the E-Rate cap by $1.5 billion, and that puts us on course to have high-capacity broadband and Wi-Fi in all of our schools over the next 5 years. We need to go for it because the stakes are high. Other nations are now leading the way when it comes to bringing broadband to schools. South Korea has wired all of its schools with high-capacity broadband. So has Estonia, where there's a nationwide effort to teach students as young as 7 years old to learn how to code. Uruguay has connected nearly all of its primary and secondary schools. And China, India, and Thailand are working on ways to bring one-to-one connected device learning to students through large-scale purchasing at low cost. In so many ways, these countries are different than the United States, but they have students, like ours, who will be competing in a global economy. And there is no reason to let other nations outspend us, out-educate us, and out-achieve us. So before our students file out of their classrooms and head home for the holidays, today we make a choice. Today we choose a future where all American kids have access to digital age learning, no matter who they are, where they live, or where they go to school. Today we are bold. We put in place, at long last, E-Rate 2.0. But of course that doesn't mean that our job is done, because going forward we need to recognize that expanding opportunity goes beyond the school doors. We can't forget that in a world where students rely on online resources and digital content in the classroom, they also need access to broadband when they go home. Today, roughly 7 in 10 teachers assign homework that requires access to broadband. But the FCC's own data suggests that almost 1 in 3 households do not subscribe to broadband services at any speed for reasons like lack of affordability and lack of interest. Think about those numbers. Where they overlap is what I call the homework gap. If you are a student in a household without broadband, just getting homework done is hard. Applying for a scholarship is challenging. While low-income families are adopting smartphones with internet access at high rates, let me submit to you that a phone is just not how you want to research and type a paper, apply for jobs, or further your education. Now, there's a recent study by the Pew Research Center that found that more than half of teachers in low-income communities said that their students' lack of access to online resources at home presented a major challenge to integrating technology into their teaching. So not only are students who lack access at home struggling to keep up, their lack of access is holding our education system back. It means too many young people will go through school without fully developing the skills that give them a fair shot in the digital age. The good news is we can do something about it. In 1985, when most communications involved a cord and President Reagan was in the White House, the FCC set up a program called Lifeline. Today, it supports telephone access in 14 million low-income households across the country. But just like E-rate, it needs an update for the broadband era. Instead of having the program only support voice service, we should allow consumers to choose between applying the same support to either voice service or broadband service. Doing so would modernize the Lifeline program, and it would also help us address the homework gap. I think the homework gap is the cruelest part of the digital divide, but it's within our power to bridge it, help kids get their schoolwork done, and expand internet access. So going forward, I hope my colleagues will work with me to close the homework gap, because if we combine that effort with our work here on E-rate, we are going to be able to turn a generation of students from digital consumers to digital creators. And as the parent of 2 school-aged digital natives, I think there would be nothing sweeter. So this week, Computer Science Education Week, it starts. We put in place a bold vision for E-rate 2.0. We put ourselves on track to bring big broadband to our schools and modernize our libraries. We put our students on course to develop the skills essential for them to compete in a global digital economy. Amen. It's about time. Finally, I want to acknowledge the tremendous work has gone into today's decision. Thank you to the Wireline Competition Bureau, the Office of Managing Director, for your efforts. I also want to thank the countless teachers and librarians I was able to meet with over the course of this effort in Alaska, Arkansas, California, Colorado, and too many other places to mention. Today's decision's for you, the students you work with, and the futures you help shape. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Rosenworcel. And as been true on some other items up here, I think that we have just counted 3 votes for Lifeline reform, too.
I think we have.
Commissioner Pai.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all of our visitors here today. I appreciate everything that you do all across this country to educate the next generation of leaders, to inform the current generation of library patrons. We really appreciate your input. In particular, I want to give a shout out to Principal Dyer-Dorr, because I grew up in southeast Kansas, very close to northwest Arkansas, from a poor town of about 10,000 people. I remember when we got our first McDonald's, it was front page news in the Parsons Sun, so I know what it's like to grow up in a rural area. I'll have my people talk to your people. We'll make it happen soon. But to the issue of the day. I don't normally claim to be clairvoyant, but last week at the FCBA Chairman's Dinner, I was compared to Karnak the Magnificent, complete with a photoshopped picture of me wearing a turban. Now, at the time, I assumed the chairman's joke was going to be about the E-rate order before us today, and the intuition that I expressed back in July. That is, I was expecting this clip. I doubt that the recent scramble to claim fiscal responsibility is anything more than a passing fad. And several outside parties have already told me that they've been promised a post-election increase in the E-rate budget. They even told me the specific month that it was coming, December. The story was remarkably consistent. So, mark my words, any talk of fiscal responsibility will be short-lived. 5 months, maybe 6, we'll be back at this table discussing how much to increase Americans' phone bills. I'm investing in the stock market because what do you know? It is 5 months later to the day, and lo and behold, we're discussing whether to spend an additional $1.5 billion each year to pay for the promises made last summer. That's a $7.5 billion payoff over 5 years for the entrenched interests that thrive under the bureaucratic yoke of today's E-rate program. That's a 17.2% telephone tax increase for hardworking American families that are still struggling to make ends meet in this lackluster economy. And while those who can afford to live in Georgetown, Manhattan's Upper East Side, or Malibu might scoff at these increased taxes, families in the rest of America are sick of being nickeled and dimed by Washington politicians. Now, the Commission is well aware of this. It is no accident that a spending increase was promised before the election quietly, and the tax increase to pay for it is coming after the election, the unmistakable message of which was not exactly nationwide yearning for a Beltway bureaucracy's tax hike. As a candid consultant might put it, back in July, the lack of transparency was a huge political advantage. That was really, really critical to get the thing to pass. Now, this tax and spend scheme is nothing new. As you'll see on this chart, universal service contribution rates have jumped 60% already under this administration, from 9.5% to 16.1%. With today's new spending, they'll go up dramatically yet again. The contribution factor could rise as high as 20.3% next year, based on the existing algorithms and calculations available on the FCC's own website. Now, that would make it more than double the rate from January 2009, and it would be the first time in history that the factor has cracked the 20% mark. That's a tax that each and every one of you with a phone bill pays each and every month. Now, a large chunk of the $7.5 billion in new spending will go to pay for the Wi-Fi pilot program created last summer. Now, we were told back in July that the math for the program added up, that we wouldn't need to increase taxes to pay for it. We were told that the 2-year pilot would cost taxpayers $2 billion. Well, today's order is, in effect, a report card on the Commission's math skills, and we are receiving an F. How so? Because the costs will be much, much higher. First, the order extends the program to 5 years, which adds more than $3 billion to the expected price tag alone. Second, the order now acknowledges that the budget of $1 billion per year really doesn't exist, since, quote, there is pent-up demand and applicants may seek a larger portion of the budget early on in the 5-year cycle. In other words, this Wi-Fi pilot might cost $1, $2, or even $3 billion in its first year. Consumers' only protection? A baseless expectation, as the order puts it, that requests will be reasonable. We'll see. Now, it's harder to pin down where exactly the other $4.5 billion in new spending will go. The order claims that this money is needed for fully funding Category 1 demand, that is, broadband connections, but our staff's own estimates show that's not the case. Their data show that aggregate demand for broadband connections will remain $35 million to $326 million below the current E-rate cap for the foreseeable future. That means that we don't need an E-rate tax increase to pay for the broadband connections that schools and libraries want now or in the next 5 years. Now, others have claimed that the money is needed to close the so-called rural fiber gap. Yet the order apparently abandons that concept. None of that new spending is earmarked for it. No money is set aside for rural schools and libraries. Not one safeguard ensures that money is spent where there's an actual fiber gap. So the nation's largest and savviest urban school districts could easily soak up all of the new funding to overbuild existing fiber networks. The order's philosophy brings to mind the sage word from John Hurt's character in the movie Contact. First rule in government spending: why build one when you can have two at twice the price? Now, to be fair, the order does spend a few paragraphs trying to address the differing challenges of connecting rural and urban America. But the order gets even that wrong. You see, rather than sensibly directing money to poor schools in small towns or community libraries in the Alaskan bush and other remote areas, the order more than doubles the funding for libraries in the nation's largest cities and their suburbs. And this lopsided carve-out, I submit, is not fair to the poor schools and libraries that actually need the funding. And this special interest giveaway to the nation's best-funded libraries just shows how little Washington, D.C. actually cares about rural America. So, why does the Commission now think that another $4.5 billion is needed to meet demand for broadband connectivity? In large part, it is because we are succumbing to a disease that afflicts so many inside the Washington Beltway. We don't show that we care about a problem by doing the hard work needed to solve it, to actually deliver, as Superintendent Dance rightly put it, equitable access for students across the country. No. Instead, we talk about how much we care about a problem based on how much money we are willing to throw at it, a public demonstration of supposed compassion and courage and vision, all of which is, of course, easy to do when you're spending other people's money. Now, it's thus become clear that the FCC has given up any pretense of safeguarding the funds that taxpayers have entrusted to us in favor of what my colleague, Commissioner O'Reilly, aptly called an E-rate spending spree. Now, if you want to know what real compassion, courage, and vision on this issue would look like, one example would be to end the incentives for a small minority of schools and libraries to engage in wasteful spending, so that E-rate dollars are more equitably distributed and are able to stretch farther for more schools and libraries. Now, for more than a decade, the Commission has known that the E-rate subsidy system, which gives some applicants discounts of up to 90% without limitation, encourages wasteful spending. A 2003 USAC task force found that the high discount rate gave certain applicants little incentives to spend wisely, and recommended that applicants receive no more than $4 in E-rate for every $1 that they spend. A 2013 independent study showed, and I quote, that applicants with higher discount rates plan to spend significantly more per student in pre-discount dollars, with the highest discount applicants spending more than twice as much as their peers. And it's just common sense. The less of your own money you have to put in, the more of others' money you're going to demand. And that means that plenty of other worthy schools and libraries are going to lose out because there won't be any money left for them. And that's why our 2013 notice last year recognized that applicants receiving substantial 80 to 90% discounts have greatly reduced incentives to ensure that they are receiving the lowest price services or that they are getting only services that they need. And that's why just 5 months ago, the FCC increased the matching requirement for internal connections. We said then that requiring higher matches will lead applicants to pursue lower prices for eligible Category 2 services more aggressively. Right on. So in the face of more than a decade of evidence and analysis and a lifetime of common sense, what does the Commission do today? Unbelievably, it actually reduces the matching requirement. So now some applicants will have to pay nothing out of pocket for new construction, not even the cost of a cup of coffee. In other words, there will be literally no economic incentive for some schools or libraries to choose the most cost-effective option or to avoid gold-plating their networks, and thus no assurance whatsoever that the vast majority of schools that don't get those discounts will have any money to count on. Enabling wasteful spending like this isn't courageous or compassionate. It's just crazy. Now, it gets worse. The order overturns a 14-year-old bipartisan decision designed to limit the amount of funding a wealthy applicant could apply for in a given year. Why would we do that? The order next overturns the 9-year-old bipartisan prohibition on E-rate paying vendors before applicants contribute their matching funds. Good luck making sure that matching funds are actually paid. The order overturns the 4-year-old bipartisan decision to limit the funding available for dark fiber, as well as the 17-year-old bipartisan decision that E-rate would not support wide area networks constructed by applicants. So what did these safeguards keep spending in check and deterred overbuilding? In short, the order endorses a free-for-all of vendor financing and unbounded spending on terms that would make the subprime mortgage industry blush. The order's only defense to all of this is that it follows the model the Commission adopted in the Healthcare Connect Fund order to ensure that the fund supports self-construction only when it is the most cost-effective option. If only it were so. The FCC added 6 critical and independent safeguards to the Healthcare Connect Fund order. Of these 6, only one will apply here, and even then, just possibly. To pretend that the Healthcare Connect Fund order is any sort of precedent for today's action is a bad joke, and the American taxpayer is the ultimate punchline. And lack of fiscal responsibility is not the only flaw here. Today's order never proposed to remove some of the safeguards it eliminates today. There are some legal deficiencies such as reducing the applicant's contribution to 0%. Nor does the order explain how the public could reasonably have expected 17 paragraphs of new requirements for high-cost recipients, such as new requirements to deploy broadband without additional support, new price regulation of broadband internet services, and new tariffing obligations. These detailed requirements all stem from a single vague question back in June about the Commission's, quote, expectations, rather than any actual proposed rules. Nor does the order explain the abrupt reversal of the 1997 decision that building and purchasing of equipment and facilities for self-construction do not meet the statutory definition of telecommunications and do not appear to fall within the narrow provision that allows support for access to the Internet. In other words, the FCC decided in the Clinton administration that what we're deciding to do today was unlawful. Not exactly a technicality, but no matter. Legally sustainable decisions have not been much of a priority of late. Now, despite today's order, and despite July's sad partisan retreat, I still believe in my heart that E-rate is a program worth fighting for, and that the future of education is one of the nation's top priorities. Now, part of my reason for saying that is personal. The very reason I'm sitting on this dais is because of education. I come from a poor family in a third world country that viewed education as the only asset that a family could never lose. My grandfather, for example, had to go to work and drop out of high school and go to work to support his family when his own father died. His one demand of his wife, my ultimate grandmother, was to save some rupees every month to be able to send each and every one of their children, including the girls, to school. Similarly, part of the reason I care so much about education, and E-rate in particular, is professional. When I spoke to villagers in America's northernmost library in Barrow, Alaska, I saw how broadband can connect a community that no road reaches. When I visited Los Angeles in the spring and Chicago in the fall at Mayor Rahm Emanuel's invitation, I saw the progress that poor children can make when technology is integrated in the classroom. And I want to thank Mayor Emanuel in particular for his support for some of my proposals. In South Dakota and Kansas, I've seen the potential of next-generation technologies to empower small communities and give rural Americans the opportunities found in our nation's largest cities. And that is why I've taken pains over the last year and a half to put together a detailed proposal for real reform of the E-rate program, reform that would deliver equitable access to every student, every library patron across this country, not the ones that get the discounts, not the ones that can afford to hire the consultants, not the ones that are voiceless at the commission, but the ones who are doing the hard work every day to connect Americans to digital opportunities. But to them, again, the FCC fails to deliver real reform. This order is not profound. It is prodigal. The commission shies away from making any hard choices and instead simply pours money into a broken system. And that's not what the American people want. Whatever glowing press releases and gleaming tweets follow this vote. Americans want a student-centered E-rate program. And that means, as I proposed last year, a one-page application instead of the numerous forms and hoops you have to jump through today. That means a funding commitment process that would last no more than a week. That means additional funding targeted to rural and remote schools and libraries. That means an end to the outdated priority system so that local communities can make their own decisions about what they need and when they need it. That means a dramatic reduction in the amount of money applicants would spend on consultants and the amount of time they'd have to spend on USAC appeals, which currently last up to a decade. And that means an increase in funding of up to $1 billion each year for next-generation services, all without raising a single penny. You can look at my proposal. It's all in there. But not one of those things was offered last July to address bipartisan criticism of the first E-rate proposal, even though each of them would have drawn broad public support. And of course, needless to say, not one of those things is contained in today's order. And so, the students and teachers, parents and school boards, libraries, and library patrons that I've spoken with will have to wait for the bold solutions that could have helped them. For now, they'll just have to contribute more to the E-rate program and get less out of it. They'll continue to be trapped in a bureaucracy that makes the IRS look user-friendly. They'll be denied 21st century digital opportunities for years more. It just won't happen during this administration. But in time, I do believe we will achieve real E-rate reform. And I hope I'm clairvoyant about that too, because at the end of the day, every one of our communities, urban and rural, rich and poor, deserve it. For all of these reasons, I dissent.
Commissioner O'Reilly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For you educators out there, let me outline a basic premise. A person can support E-rate, E-rate modernization, and the good work of the panelists in front of us, and yet not be in favor of this particular item. Sadly, this item makes the E-rate program more complex, less efficient, and potentially wasteful in return. Therefore, I cannot support it. Chief among my many concerns is that the massive increase in E-rate cap, an extra $1.5 billion per year, is not offset by other reductions within the Universal Service Fund. That means the total fund will grow from over $8 billion to nearly $10 billion per year. I have continued to advocate for an overall cap on the Universal Service Fund as one means to keep spending in check. The fact that the Commission refuses to adopt one even now suggests there are more spending sprees to come that will put us over the $10 billion mark. This is completely unacceptable. Having been in Washington, D.C. for a considerable amount of time and being part of a number of efforts that resulted in billions of expenditures, it still amazes me how some people find it so easy to give away others' hard-earned income. It is usually couched with the notion that it's just a little bit more needed to produce some amazing outcome. But what happens when that little bit comes at the expense of a family canceling phone service or being unable to buy the things they need? I'm also very troubled by the continued lack of targeting within the program. In the summer, the Commission discovered a Wi-Fi gap and is committing billions of dollars to address it, even though, as my travels around the country have confirmed, many schools and libraries do not actually need it. Just a few months later, the Commission seemingly discovered a rural connectivity gap and still doesn't know where the gap is. As a result, funding will be provided to all comers, and we'll cross our fingers that it finds its way to the right places. Even if the funding were better targeted to address these gaps, I would still be concerned with the smattering of reforms themselves. I'm particularly concerned about the self-provisioning option, which could lead to overbuilding and could ultimately jeopardize service to the community at large. Instead, as my colleague highlighted, the item places undue trust in certain safeguards to protect against wastes. In particular, the item relies on a few procedures cherry-picked from the Healthcare Connect order, such as requiring that the projects be bid more than one way and performing cost-effectiveness reviews. What it fails to mention is that we have a very little experience to date with those safeguards, which I was not even here when they were established. It also ignores the fact that the Healthcare Connect program is an order of magnitude smaller. Moreover, important safeguards from the Healthcare Connect order were left out entirely, such as capping the funding available for construction. Another critical safeguard absent in the significant matching requirement. In the Healthcare Connect order, for example, the Commission set a match at 35%. But here, once again, the Commission refused to increase the matching requirement at all. Doing so would not only improve incentives for more efficient spending, but also stretch dollars further within the program. Instead, the item goes in the opposite direction. Applicants would get a bonus if a state kicks in funding. That only serves to penalize applicants in fiscally responsible states. And the fact that states can already pay all of the non-discounted portion for applicants provides little comfort because that can create the wrong incentive in and of itself. I'm also disappointed that this order doubles down on another misguided decision from the previous order. I had warned that using a square foot calculation to set the Category 2 budgets for libraries was one of the silliest policies I'd ever seen. Now the order seemingly discovers that urban libraries have a higher density of patrons needing Wi-Fi, the second most obvious discovery in this order. So the order resorts to increasing the urban library per foot budget, which further proves the foolishness of the new standard. In addition, I want to highlight a new requirement that the Connect America Fund recipients participate in E-rate competitive bidding process and that the bid amounts meet national reasonable comparability benchmarks to be determined by the Bureau at a later date. In 2011, the Commission adopted an expectation, as my colleague highlighted, not a requirement, that CAF recipients provide higher bandwidth offerings at reasonably comparable rates. Earlier this year, the Commission sought comment on how to fulfill that expectation, but nowhere did it propose to convert the expectation to a requirement. At a minimum, the specific requirements being adopted today should have been put out for comment. I will say that I'm somewhat pleased that the Commission is acting on petitions for reconsideration to change the definition of rule to something more realistic, but I suggested this be done months ago. For those critics who argue it is the role of Republicans to find common ground, I would argue that I've gone out of my way to do this on this issue. It is hard to say with a straight face that I'm the obstinate one after I outlined 6 very reasonable principles on E-rate reform, and this item violates each one. Not 1, not 2, but all 6. Compromise was thrown out long ago by the majority, so particular groups critical of the last E-rate item could no longer attack those flawed decisions. To sum up my concerns, we'll be spending a great deal of money without any meaningful safeguards to ensure that it is spent cost efficiently in places and on services that are truly needed. I dissent.
I want to begin by again thanking all of you who came to share your stories with us today, and to say to the students that you have seen what makes America great in 2 aspects today. One is the exercise of First Amendment rights to express yourself. And the second is in a deliberative process in which I think you probably won't be surprised to discover that there's a lot of disagreement up here. I took some notes while the panel was talking here this morning. Ms. Warlick talked about the joy of learning. What a great concept. People talked about performance being up, discipline being down, rural equality, graduations up, college up, the power of the library, connectivity of a community, and Ms. Hawkins' great line of obliterating classroom walls. That's what we're about here today. I can understand that there is opposition to some of the approaches taken. I cannot understand. I'm aghast at the hostility that is expressed to giving students the tools they need to get a 21st century education, when we know as a fact that 2/3 of the schools in America have inadequate connectivity to be able to deliver the kinds of services that we heard talked about here today, and that I've heard when I talked to some students earlier. 2/3, 40 million students without adequate connectivity. That's an F. 1/3 who couldn't get the connectivity at a competitive price if they wanted to. That's an F. And we're taking care of those issues today. I'm also aghast at the opposition to controlling costs and how we need to institutionalize ways to look out for the dollar that the American people contribute to make sure that we turn those Fs into better grades, A's. But when you get to the real bottom line on this issue, we can talk about this section or that section. We can talk about this part of the program or that part of the program. But we are talking about a moral issue. The greatest responsibility, the greatest moral responsibility that any generation has is the preparation of the next generation. 16 cents a month, less than the cost of a soda at McDonald's over the course of a year, is a small price to pay for that great responsibility that we all have. So with that, I will call for the vote. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed?
No.
The ayes have it. The item is adopted. The request for editorial privileges are granted. And again, thank you to all of you for being here today. Madam Secretary, you want to read us in on the next one, please?
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, the second item will be presented by the Wireline Competition Bureau. It is entitled Connect America Fund Report and Order.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. So, to those of you who are in the process of clearing the room, if you can try and use your indoor voices, please. Ms. Veach, take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, and good morning to you, Commissioners. We're very pleased to present to you this morning an order that takes another momentous step in the Commission's implementation of the landmark Universal Service Inter-Carrier Compensation Transformation Order. Today's order will finalize decisions necessary to proceed with the offer of Connect America Phase 2 support to price cap carriers early next year, thereby paving the way for the deployment of new broadband infrastructure to millions of unserved Americans. The order would also adopt targeted reforms for rate of return carriers that the Commission proposed last April, while we continue to explore a more comprehensive plan for rate of return carriers. The actions proposed for your consideration today, combined with the reforms adopted earlier this year and the implementation of the rural broadband experiments, whose provisional selected bidders were announced last week, will allow the Commission to continue to advance further down the path outlined in the 2011 Transformation Order. I'd like to acknowledge and thank the Wireline Competition Bureau team that's brought this order to fruition, led at the division level by Alex Menard, seated at my far left, and Suzanne Yellen. I'd also like to thank our colleagues in the Office of Strategic Planning and Policy, especially Jonathan Chambers, for significant contributions to the order. With me at the table, in addition to Alex, are Ryan Palmer, Chief of our Telecommunications Access Policy Division, Carol Maddy, of course, Deputy Chief in the Bureau, and Heidi Lankow, Attorney Advisor in the Division. And Heidi now will present the item.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners.
Good morning.
The Connect America Fund has already supported the deployment of broadband to millions of unserved Americans living in rural America. But there is more work to do to ensure that rural America is not left behind. The draft order that we present to you today takes the Commission further down the path of assuring that all Americans have access to broadband. In April, the Commission proposed modest adjustments to the framework for Phase 2 of the Connect America Fund in light of marketplace developments. Today's order finalizes these decisions to make it possible for the Commission to extend the offer of Phase 2 support to price cap carriers early next year. Specifically, consistent with the Commission's commitment to revisit broadband performance obligations by 2014, the order increases the minimum broadband speed requirement from 4 to 10 megabits per second downstream for Connect America recipients that are required to deploy voice and broadband networks to fixed locations. Today, 99% of Americans in urban areas have access to fixed broadband with speeds of at least 10 megabits per second downstream, and a majority of Americans nationwide have chosen to subscribe to such service. This increase in downstream speed for the Connect America Fund will advance the Commission's goal of ensuring that Americans living in high-cost areas have access to services that are reasonably comparable to services offered in urban areas. The order also adopts targeted changes to the framework established for the offer of Phase 2 support to price cap carriers to ensure that deployment obligations recognize real-world conditions. The order extends the support term to 6 years, with an optional 7th year of support as we transition to Phase 3, adopts evenly spaced interim deployment obligations, permits price cap carriers to make adjustments in the number of locations they are required to serve with a corresponding reduction in support, and adopts clearly defined consequences for non-performance. Further, consistent with the Commission's prior decision to target funding more precisely to where it is needed, the order forbears from enforcing the federal high-cost universal service obligation of price cap carriers to offer voice service in certain census blocks where carriers are not eligible to receive Connect America support. Specifically, low-cost census blocks where price cap carriers do not receive high-cost support, high-cost census blocks that are served by unsubsidized competitors, and high-cost census blocks where the price cap carrier is replaced through a competitive bidding process by another eligible telecommunications carrier required to deploy modern networks capable of providing voice and broadband to fixed locations. The order also addresses where the Commission will make the offer of Phase 2 model-based support to price cap carriers. Specifically, the offer of model-based support will be targeted to areas lacking any competitor, subsidized or unsubsidized, offering voice and broadband that delivers 4 megabits per second downstream and 1 megabits per second upstream. Areas lacking an unsubsidized competitor offering voice and broadband at speeds of 10 megabits per second downstream and 1 megabit per second upstream will be eligible for support in the Phase 2 competitive bidding process. In April, the Commission also sought comment on a number of near-term and longer-term reforms for rate of return carriers. While the Commission continues to work on longer-term reform, including a voluntary path to model-based support for rate of return carriers that choose to pursue it, today's order adopts certain short-term reforms for rate of return carriers. First, the order adopts a revised methodology for applying the cap on high-cost loop support to better address the race-to-the-top incentives that the Commission previously sought to limit with its benchmarking rule that utilized quantile regression analysis. Under the simple rule adopted today, support will be distributed more equitably among all high-cost carriers, and carriers reporting the highest expenses will have better incentives to be as efficient as possible. Second, the order adopts certain minor adjustments to the rule to eliminate support in rate of return study areas where there is 100% overlap with an unsubsidized competitor. The Bureau recommends adoption of this item and requests editorial privileges. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all of you for your efforts on this, Commissioner Clyburn.
Thank you. In Audrey Neffenegger's debut model, The Traveler's Wife, Claire expresses her frustration about waiting by saying, "It's hard being left behind. It's hard being the one who stays." For too many in rural America, the long wait for broadband is not only hampering their ability to improve their daily lives, it is curbing the best hope these communities have to be competitive. This is why we have set such an ambitious goal for universal broadband access and remain steadfast in our vision of closing these gaps. In 2011, I was proud to cast a vote approving comprehensive reforms of our universal service and inter-carrier compensation regimes, which puts this country firmly on a path to narrow these divides. I must admit that when I voted to approve these reforms in 2011, I had hoped we would have made further progress. Despite the hard work of a diligent, dedicated team, things have taken a bit longer than first anticipated. But instead of lamenting, the Commission has used this lapse of time most efficiently by approving funding to connect unserved areas and by making adjustments based on the lessons and the changes in the industry. So just what has happened over the past 3 years? We've authorized funding to serve over 630,000 locations, or approximately 1.65 million people in 45 states plus Puerto Rico, with fixed broadband for the very first time, provided mobile coverage for over tens of thousands of road miles, and connected over 50,000 people living on tribal lands with access to mobile broadband. And we are not resting, because there is more work to do for millions who still lack access. The potential to change and improve the daily lives of these Americans when it comes to education, healthcare, economic empowerment, and civic engagement may be life-changing, and that is why I am so pleased that today's item takes some final steps to implement the Phase 2 framework from the 2011 USF ICC Transformation Order. One key area warranting another look is speed. Remember, the Transformation Order called on us to reevaluate speeds periodically. While 4 megabits may have been reasonable in 2011, it is clear that this level is too slow for consideration now and in the foreseeable future. If our goal remains for rural areas to have services reasonably comparable to urban areas, it is important for us to aim for speeds at 10 megabits and beyond. We have also had the opportunity to approve $100 million for rural broadband experiments, to assess interest in serving unserved areas, and to help inform the competitive bidding auction. The process shows the benefit of conducting experiments and learning lessons before investing upwards of $1.8 billion over 10 years. I am pleased that the non-winning bidders that propose to construct networks that provide 100 megabits will have the opportunity to submit financial and technical information certified by an engineering firm to have these areas excluded from the right of first refusal. As we know and hear so often from Chairman Wheeler, competition more often than not drives the best prices and services and can bring about long-term savings to the Universal Service Program. And as I said, when the Commission adopted a USF ICC Transformation Order, this is a marathon, not a sprint. And while the progress we are making today will put us ever so closer to that finish line, we have more work to do, including the implementation of the Mobility Fund. I hope to be able to vote on a final order adopting the final parameters of the Mobility Fund real soon. While I endorse this item in many respects, there is one aspect I cannot support. I believe forbearance from eligible telecommunication carrier obligations is premature until incumbent LECs no longer receive the benefits of implicit and explicit subsidies due to their legacy status. In addition to receiving high-cost support, including frozen support, and for some Connect America Fund intercarrier compensation support, incumbents continue to receive implicit subsidies from intercarrier compensation. These are subsidies that the FCC has found were created to recover the cost of the local network to achieve the goal of universal service. The USF ICC Transformation Order adopted an endpoint of bill and keep for all traffic, but did not phase down originating access nor reduce all terminating access charges. Incumbents, therefore, continue to receive such subsidies and will continue to do so in the future until the FCC completes the transition to bill and keep for all traffic. Until such time, these providers continue to receive implicit subsidies designed to further our universal service objectives. More specifically, the item forbears from ETC obligations for price cap incumbent LECs in 3 broad areas. 1, census blocks that the cost model determines are low cost. 2, census blocks served in an by an unsubsidized competitor, and census blocks where another ETC receives support, likely due to winning the competitive bidding process. I'm particularly concerned about forbearance in areas where the cost model considers a census block to be low cost. For 1, granting forbearance from this category puts an incredible amount of faith that the cost model's projections that these are in fact low-cost areas is accurate. It also potentially puts in jeopardy the ability of consumers in these areas to have basic voice from their incumbent provider. In the spirit of compromise, I propose modifying forbearance to census block where an unsubsidized competitor exists or where a subsidized ETC competitor wins the area in the competitive bidding process. According to staff, given the substantial overlap between areas served by unsubsidized competitors and low-cost areas, and the difference between my proposal and the forbearance item is small. The item indicates that over 90% of locations have access to a cable provider. While not significant in the aggregate, I am concerned about what happens to these consumers. In other words, my compromise would have granted forbearance to all areas where consumers have an alternative option. This would have granted forbearance to the vast majority of the country, since cable providers offer broadband to nearly 90% of the entire population. Given that these consumers have no alternative fixed providers, I do not see how the item can conclude that forbearance does not harm those customers or that forbearance is in the public interest. To be fair, the forbearance analysis relies heavily on Section 214, the Section 214A process to ensure consumers are protected and the public interest is not harmed. This is cold comfort for me. In last month's technology transition notice of proposed rulemaking and declaratory ruling, the Commission sought comment on changes to Section 214 on the Section 214A process to ensure that consumers are protected and have adequate substitutes, and that discontinuance does not harm competition. I fear it is premature to rely on Section 214A until such process is reformed. Finally, while I am concerned that the potential pressure the decision will place on states as carriers use forbearance as a means to avoid oversight, I appreciate the clarification that forbearance does not preempt state carriers of last resort obligations. So in sum, while I am pleased to support the vast majority of this item, I respectfully dissent from the forbearance analysis. I would like to thank, once again, the dedicated staff of the Wireline Competition Bureau and the Office of Strategic Planning for their hard work on this item.
Thank you, Commissioner Clyburn. Commissioner Rosenworcel.
All right, let's start with what we know. Universal service is a cherished principle in communications because it was way back in 1934 when Congress first directed the FCC to make communications by wire and radio available so far as possible to all the people of the United States. And it was Congress who expanded on this notion by adding new principles to guide universal service in 1996. As a result, the duty to preserve and advance universal service is now the law of the land. That law also requires us to ensure that universal service evolves over time. I believe that this is what our report and order does today. To keep up with changes in the broadband marketplace, we revise our speed requirement for recipients of high-cost support to a minimum of 10 megabits downstream. I support that change and many others that we put in place here today, but I'm mindful that as we seek to evolve universal service policy, we can also create more complexity and uncertainty for broadband providers. Building networks takes time, and it is not easy in our least populated communities. So I'm pleased that in today's report and order, we make some adjustment to the framework for the offer of model-based support for price cap carriers. Now, going forward, as we implement further universal service reforms, I hope we put a premium on crafting rules in ways that reduce complexity and uncertainty. Because if we do this right, we will connect America by providing better broadband and wireless service in rural America. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Pai.
Well, I am disappointed, though perhaps not surprised, that the room has cleared out dramatically for this item. But it is a shame in part because the folks who are here won't get to be able to see the result of the work of our fantastic staff. Thank you to the Wireline Competition Bureau in particular for navigating the very complicated thickets of these issues. You've really presented an item that I think is very thoughtful, and even where I disagree with it, I certainly appreciate your willingness to talk through the issues with us, to have an open discussion, and we are grateful to your efforts and look forward to working with you in what I'm sure will not be the last item addressing universal service issues. Now, having grown up in rural Kansas, I know what it's like to wait for your hometown to catch up with urban America. In the 1980s, small towns were waiting for cable. In the 1990s, we pined for an Olive Garden. In the 2000s, we waited for good cell phone service. And today, of course, it's all about broadband. Now, 3 years ago, the FCC told rural Americans, you could stop waiting. The Commission's Universal Service Transformation Order created the Connect America Fund Phase 2, which we anticipated would start paying for new broadband connections to unserved areas by January 1st of 2013. Almost 2 years later, we are finally launching that project. Like my colleagues, I wish we would have done so sooner. Rural families and small businesses, after all, have already waited too long. But I'm glad nonetheless that, thanks in part to our fantastic staff, we are finally getting something done. However, I too cannot support every aspect of today's decision. For me, it's because I fear that we are going to leave many communities without broadband for the foreseeable future. Incentivizing wireline broadband providers to deploy service deep into the unserved countryside requires a balancing act, and that's one that the Universal Service Transformation Order performed admirably. Yet today's order disrupts that balance. Specifically, it raises the speed benchmark to 10 megabits per second, the right call in my book, but then largely ignores that this change roughly doubles the expected costs of deployment. An appropriate counterweight, in my view, would have been increasing the term of support from 5 years to 10, but the order increases it only marginally to 6. Now, this imbalance needlessly risks tipping the scales against deployment, which may strand millions of Americans in broadband dead zones for years to come. Now, an impressive bipartisan chorus in Congress has sung the same refrain. 64 members of Congress, including almost a quarter of the Senate, have written to the FCC, concerned that our implementation of the Connect America Fund won't be sufficient to ensure universal broadband deployment. Among the many examples, Senator Roy Blunt wrote asking us to heed the advice of local communities and stakeholders and adopt a 10-year funding period to allow adequate time for construction. Senator Bill Nelson asked that we consider extending the CAF2 funding period from the current 5 years to 10 years to allow adequate time for the construction of higher capacity networks. Senators Maria Cantwell and Patty Murray wrote to us that we must extend the term from 5 years to 10 years. Senators Ron Johnson and Tammy Baldwin reminded us that if the Commission more than doubles the speed requirements without allowing the appropriate level of flexibility in other elements of CAF2, the program's overall mission could be endangered, and they asked us to extend the term of support up to 10 years. The Wyoming congressional delegation also wrote that thousands of rural communities are now counting on CAF2, and they asked that we take to heart the idea of extending the term of support up to 10 years. Now, at a time when most Americans don't think politicians in Washington can agree on anything of significance, I think it's remarkable to see a bipartisan legislative consensus on broadband deployment, one that reflects remarkable political and geographic diversity. Unfortunately, rather than heed this wise counsel from our nation's elected representatives, the FCC goes its own way, with little in the way of evidence to support its decision. In an effort to find common ground, I offered to support a modest extension of the term of support to 8 years. There was bipartisan support for it, and I want to thank my colleague and friend, Commissioner Rosenworcel, for her backing on this matter and her advocacy, as well as her advocacy on behalf of rural consumers generally. Unfortunately, we fell one vote short. In the end, I hope that I'm wrong. I hope that carriers will seize upon all of the opportunities available to deploy broadband to the farthest reaches of our nation under the Connect America Fund. But because the order doesn't take the steps necessary to entirely secure that potential, I can't support it in full. I accordingly approve in part and dissent in part. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner O'Reilly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Today, the Commission chooses to trade faster deployment to all for marginally higher speed broadband for some. The reason I can concur with this item is that the chairman and staff were willing to work with me to make improvements to promote faster deployment to some unserved consumers, and the Commission will be providing carriers at least some ETC relief in areas that low cost or are served by certain other providers. To be clear, I do support higher speeds for all Americans. I do believe that if we had stuck to the original plan put forth in 2011, we would have gotten basic 4.1 broadband service to the maximum number of unserved Americans, while also increasing speeds for others in the process. That's because deploying 4.1 to more remote areas would mean higher speeds in areas past. Moreover, the reality is that anyone that's deploying in unserved areas these days won't be installing copper, and we would have all done so in 5 years. We also would have opened more areas to a Phase 3 competitive bidding process sooner, which could have meant even better speeds, lower costs of the funds, or even both. Instead, consumers will now have to wait longer to get service, and at the end of the timeline, they will only be guaranteed speeds of 10.1. And that's just the lucky ones, those that don't fall within the territory that carriers can choose to write off altogether. I'm also worried that providers that might have been interested in competing for funding in 3 years, if we had stuck to the original plan, will decide that the fix is in and won't bother to show up for an auction that we claim will happen in 5 years. It is true that some incumbents will turn down the not-so-statewide commitment in some places, and those areas will go to auction sooner. But opening those areas to competing providers causes difficulty. But rethinking CAF Phase 2 and resulting delays have muddied the waters as well. Supposedly, that auction will be held in 2016. But I'm skeptical that the Commission can pull it off, given the amount of work and the Commission resources need to complete the incentive auction now scheduled at that same time. Moreover, once we do get around to the post-ROFR auction, the winning bidders will have a full 10 years to complete their deployment. So unserved consumers in those areas may not get service until 2026. That is just laughable. Moreover, I've seen no evidence of any work on a remote areas fund, the backstop to provide service in areas that aren't claimed by incumbents or at auction. There's no reason that we cannot start to work on the RAF and have a specific framework ready for when we know the areas it needs to cover. If we don't plan ahead, we could use up all the funding in lower cost areas, jeopardizing service in these hardest to reach areas. For those that think that there's much to do about nothing, I present a map of the price cap areas. If you can't see the key, the dark green portions are areas that were initially eligible for Phase 2 support at the start of the challenge process because neither incumbents nor unsubsidized competitors were in those areas offering service at the requisite speed. The dark red are the extremely high-cost areas that are most likely to end up in the RAF after the post-ROFR auction. That's a lot of areas and a lot of consumers, particularly west of the Mississippi. To sum up my concerns, based on the rules adopted today, we hope that Americans that live in those dark green areas will be served within 6 to 10 years from now. But for many, it will only be at 10.1. Think about what 10.1 is going to seem like at that time. For those dark red areas, all we can say is that we have a plan to have a plan. For them, forget about debates about fast lane or slow lane. They have no lanes. Even with these serious shortcomings, I suggested improvements as I routinely do, in hopes that engaging will mean that at least the item doesn't get any worse. And that was a real possibility here, as carriers may not have received ETC relief in areas that are low cost or served by certain other providers. I'm also pleased that the order now includes incentives for carriers to identify upfront areas encompassing at least 2% out of the 5% of locations that they are no longer required to serve, so that rather than stranding consumers in those areas for the duration of CAF Phase 2, they could be potentially served by another provider. Similarly, the order now makes clear that there must be deployment to truly unserved areas even in the early years of the term. Sadly, a number of my edits were still rejected. Top of the list, as before, the item ignores my repeated call for an overall cap on USF, on the argument that this isn't the place to do it, although that's the same argument that's been made on every USF item we've had to date. On balance, however, and in light of the accommodations made by the chairman and his good staff, I'm able to concur with the order. I want to thank the staff at the table and all those that have worked on this item and look forward to working on this issue in the years ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner O'Reilly, and thank you for your contributions. We are at a midway point in this process. The evolution from voice support to broadband support was started under Chairman Jedikowski, and we're in preparation for a 2016 auction to determine the most efficient broadband delivery for rural areas. We clearly want to make sure that this money that we are about to spend isn't spent on second-class broadband service, which is why we've increased the cap to 10 megabits per second. It's only rational to do that, and it's only a step. This is an offer that we are making to price cap carriers. We will pay you to build 10 megabits per second on these terms. If you don't want to build on these terms, then we will turn to the auction to allocate public funds across alternative technologies and let market forces step in to fill that void. So I say this is an evolutionary process. We're in the middle of the process. I appreciate the support from my colleagues, and we will now call for the vote. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? The ayes have it. Requests for editorial privileges are granted. Madam Secretary, lead us on, please.
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, the final item will be presented by the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau, and it is entitled Broadcast Incentive Auction Public Notice.
Mr. Sherman, are you going to do the kickoff? You're going to do the kickoff. Mr. Epstein, take it away, sir.
Thank you, sir. It is now good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. We are now at a critical junction on our path to implementing the first ever broadcast incentive auction. Since the Commission's incentive auction report and order was adopted in May, the staff has completed work on many significant proposals for Commission consideration, including the wireless microphones notice, the Part 15 notice, the low power notice, the second report and order, and further notice addressing aggregate and inter-service interference. The incentive auction team has also been hard at work on broadcaster outreach, releasing an information package to help broadcasters make informed decisions about whether and how to participate in the auction. Starting next month, the team will take our broadcaster outreach on the road with visits to television markets in every region of the country, both larger and smaller ones. This morning, we will present for the Commission's consideration the incentive auction comment public notice. With this notice, we're seeking public input on detailed proposals that make specific recommendations to implement the rules and policies adopted by the Commission in the incentive auction report and order. The input we receive in response to the comment PN will be incorporated into a final procedures public notice, which will be acted on at the Commission level, and that will spell out the specific procedures necessary to carry out the auction. Just as in every incentive auction order or item that we bring to the Commission, this has been the work of many bureaus and offices, including here primarily the Wireless Bureau, but with input from OET, Media Bureau, International Bureau, and of course the Office of General Counsel. Joining me at the table here are Roger Sherman, Chief of the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau, Howard Simons, Vice Chair of the Task Force, Margie Weiner, Chief of the Auctions Division in the Wireless Bureau, Brett Tarnitzer, Assistant Bureau Chief of the Wireless Bureau, and Martha Stansel, Assistant Chief of Economics of the Auctions Division of the Wireless Bureau. Martha will present the item.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. The incentive auction comment public notice before you today proposes detailed procedures for the incentive auction. After consideration of the comments on these proposals, the Commission will establish the final auction design in an incentive auction procedures public notice. The comment PN seeks input on a detailed roadmap of the incentive auction process. Before the auction application deadline, the Commission will announce opening prices for the relinquishment options available to broadcasters in the reverse auction and for forward auction licenses. The comment PN proposes methodologies to establish opening prices for both the reverse and forward auctions. The proposal for reverse auction opening prices incorporates a measure of each station's impact on the repacking process and its population. Forward auction opening prices would be based on bidding units derived using an index of population weighted by relative prices from past auctions. The comment PN proposes specific bidding procedures for the reverse and forward auctions, including the use of dynamic reserve pricing in the reserve auction to facilitate price competition in all markets, enabling us to offer high opening prices to every broadcaster and letting the auction process determine the final prices. If at any time the price offered is lower than a broadcaster is willing to accept, the bidder can drop out of further bidding to be assigned a channel in its pre-auction band. The incentive auction report and order adopted the goal of a near nationwide clearing target that would include some licenses that are impaired because we have to assign some broadcasters to channels in the wireless portion of the 600 megahertz band. The comment PN proposes to limit overall impairments on a national basis to less than 20% of weighted POPs, meaning the population in each market will be weighted by the relative value of the market based on prior auction prices. This weighting will help to ensure that most of the spectrum in the most heavily weighted PEAs remains unimpaired, so as not to cause too many impairments across the most valuable markets. The comment PN proposes to offer two categories of blocks in the forward auction. Category 1 blocks with 0 to 15% impairment, and Category 2 blocks with more than 15% but not more than 50% impairment. Blocks subject to greater impairment would not be offered. At the end of each round, the auction system will assess whether the final stage rule has been satisfied. For this, the comment PN proposes an average price per megahertz pop of $1.25 in traditionally high demand markets and a spectrum benchmark of 70 megahertz, which requires clearing 84 megahertz. The comment PN proposes that if prices in the high demand market stop rising before the final stage rule is met, the auction system will implement an extended round to ascertain whether the incentive auction can conclude at that clearing target or whether it will move to a new stage with a lower clearing target. As in the regular clock rounds, prices in a market in an extended round will be identical for all blocks in the same license category. Once the final stage rule is met, the market-based spectrum reserve established in the Mobile Spectrum Holdings Report and Order will be implemented. The draft proposes to determine the maximum number of reserve blocks based on the total number of blocks offered in a PEA. Reserved blocks would include only Category 1 blocks. The comment PN proposes procedures for the incentive auction to transition to a new stage with a lower clearing target if the final stage rule is not met. It also proposes how the assignment phase will operate once the final stage rule is satisfied and bidding in the forward auction clock phase ends. Finally, the draft proposes criteria for optimizing the final channel assignment for television stations that remain on the air. These criteria including maximizing channel stays, minimizing aggregate new interference over 1%, and minimizing relocation expenses. The Incentive Auction Task Force and the Wireless Telecommunication Bureau recommend adoption of this item and request editorial privileges. Thank you.
And thank you to all of you who have worked on this incredibly complex item. Commissioner Clyburn.
When Congress gave us authority to hold the world's first voluntary reverse auction of broadcast spectrum, it presented the Commission and the communications industry with more than engineering and auction design challenges. We were faced with a character challenge. We could let doubt and acrimony minimize the success of the auction, or when it comes to a few topics, we could agree to disagree, then through collaboration proceed to design a framework that would honor the ingenuity that brought us the internet and fuels the next generation of mobile broadband innovation. There are more than a few reasons why I am optimistic that the industry will work with us to make the incentive auction a success. First, the current total of winning bids in the AWS-3 auction, a record-setting $43.2 billion in an auction that is yet to close. While we should be cautious about reading too much into it at this point, what is undeniable is that the current total bid amount far exceeds analyst predictions. Wireless carriers are opening their checkbooks to acquire spectrum, that finite resource which is the lifeblood of wireless services. And because the 600 megahertz band has superior engineering characteristics, we adopted a band plan, spectrum aggregation rules, and a strong interoperability mandate in order to encourage robust participation from small and large carriers. We should continue to see great demand from carriers for the spectrum offered in the incentive auction. Second, we have provided broadcast television stations with substantial information to encourage their participation in the reverse auction. The Commission has made clear that broadcasters in small and large markets are pivotal to clearing spectrum on a nationwide basis. The staff estimates contained in the Greenhill and Company report offer attractive valuation levels. Third, despite disagreements with the reserve spectrum cuts in our mobile spectrum holdings order and the repacking section in our incentive auction order, the wireless carriers and broadcasters are still at the table, helping us develop the proper technical rules in the Part 15 wireless microphone and inter-service interference proceedings. With all of these reasons to be optimistic, now is the time to focus on what comes next. We also need relevant stakeholders to carefully consider the details of the proposals in this auction's comment public notice. Since the 2012 notice that initiated this proceeding, we have known generally about proposals such as dynamic descending prices for the reverse auction and ascending clock auctions for the forward auction. But the current public notice provides considerably more detail on both aspects, which should encourage broad input. For those broadcasters who want to stay on the air, take a close look at how we are determining final TV channel assignments. To those who are interested in participating in the reverse auction, are there ways to improve our reverse auction pricing while properly balancing the other policy goals for the auction? With regard to the option to move from the UHF band to the VHF band, since television stations would maintain their must-carry rights with cable and satellite providers, this option should seem attractive to broadcasters. If this is your preferred option, does the procedure for choosing different relinquishment options give you enough information to know if you should choose the low VHF or high VHF band? For wireless carriers, this is the first time the Commission will use the ascending clock auctions, spectrum reserves, and an assignment round in a forward auction. Are there any details we should consider adding? I want to again commend Gary Epstein and the staff on the Incentive Auction Task Force for their hard work throughout this proceeding and for presenting us with such an excellent item. I am grateful for the time that you took with me to brief my staff on this public notice. Thank you again.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Rosenworcel.
In many ways, the public notice we adopt today is similar to so many others that the FCC has issued in advance of major spectrum auctions. We outline the application process for potential bidders. We ask what information participants should disclose to the Commission, and conversely, what information we should provide to participants. After all, these are the kind of details that make our spectrum auctions worth. But this auction is not like the others. That's because the Commission has been charged by Congress with holding the world's first spectrum incentive auctions. And the art and science of reclaiming old airwaves and repurposing them for new wireless use is not for the timid or faint-hearted. There is a lot of work to do. The novel, thorny, and flat-out hard come together in an auction like this, and it's the responsibility of the Commission and our terrific auction experts to make it all work. So in this public notice, we ask about a lot that is new. That includes questions about how to integrate a forward auction with a reverse auction, how to determine prices for broadcast stations, and how to ultimately close this two-sided auction. But one novel issue strikes me as deserving special attention. What to do when new wireless licenses are impaired by interference. This is important because with these new wireless licenses, the potential for co-channel interference and adjacent channel interference is real. After all, this auction is bound to introduce new border issues and challenges that come from having broadcasting next to broadband in our airwaves. To manage this kind of interference, the public notice proposes to create new categories of impaired wireless licenses to sell side by side with unimpaired wireless licenses. In turn, that means our auction software must identify impairments, notify wireless bidders, and assign these licenses to different categories for the forward auction. It also means we may need to repack some remaining broadcasters within the wireless broadband plan. I think this proposal shows an admirable bias toward maximizing the number of licenses we can offer in a forward auction and put to new mobile broadband use. And that's a good and respectable goal. But if we are honest, we also must acknowledge that our commitment to this objective here comes at a cost. By adding this layer of complexity, we sacrifice simplicity. That's because under this proposal, we need to identify what broadcast stations could be relocated into broadband spectrum. Then we need to determine the interference these stations could cause to adjacent wireless services in order to develop a new category of impaired wireless licenses. Then our bidders will need to decide how to value not one, but two categories of licenses, impaired and unimpaired. And then when we reach the last stage of the auction, we will have to determine which bidders in reserved and unreserved categories are eligible to bid on both categories of licenses. This is challenging. So as the record develops, I hope we can consider other ways forward. We might want to limit the number of impaired licenses we offer. We might want to distinguish between short-term interference, for instance, along the Canadian border, and longer-term encumbrances. In short, we need to ask if instead of trying to maximize licenses through a complex architecture, we should be trying to attract more participation through simplicity of design. These are not easy issues. But then again, this is not your typical public notice, nor your average spectrum auction. With incentive auctions, we are in new territory. We have hard choices to make, big decisions to reach, and promises to keep. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Pai.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When it comes to spectrum auctions, we know what works. Keep it simple. Don't restrict participation. And let the outcome be driven by market forces, not centralized planning. We stayed true to these principles in the AWS-3 auction, and the results are obvious for everyone to see. We've already raised approximately $43 billion, more than twice as much as the most optimistic predictions. What does that mean? Over $5 billion in additional funds for FirstNet to construct a nationwide interoperable public safety broadband network. Hundreds of millions of dollars for next-generation 911 implementation and public safety research. Over $20 billion for deficit reduction. And, of course, 65 megahertz of new spectrum for mobile broadband. If we want to maximize the chances that the broadcast incentive auction will succeed, we should stick to those proven principles. And that's why I was disappointed by the rules that the Commission adopted on a party-line vote back in May. These rules introduce unnecessary complexity into the incentive auction. They restrict participation in the forward auction. Instead of allowing market forces to govern, they attempt to manipulate the results through the blunt levers of command and control. And they unnecessarily provoked litigation. Now the incentive auction won't start until at least 2016. But what's done is done. And so while I voted against the incentive auction rules then, I approached today's public notice with an open mind. I didn't expect that it would propose to reverse any of the decisions made back in May. Instead, I accepted those decisions as a given and hoped that the Commission would seek comment on a set of auction procedures that would implement the incentive auction rules in the best manner possible. It was in that spirit that I offered 12 proposed edits to this item. Of course, I didn't expect all of them to be accepted, but I did hope that we could come together and reach a compromise. That hope was dashed when I received the response. The answers to 11 of my suggestions were no, 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 and no, and maybe to the 12th. Now, could we give stakeholders more time to digest these exceedingly complicated proposals and provide more meaningful feedback to the Commission, with the auction well over a year away? No. Instead of arbitrarily proposing with no real explanation a 20% threshold for the amount of spectrum that could be impaired in our near nationwide band plan, could we just seek comment on what the appropriate percentage would be? No. Rather than proposing to use a single sealed round bid for the assignment round in the forward auction, could we seek comment on different approaches, including a single sealed round bid and a traditional multiple round auction process? No. I could go on and on and on and on and on and on and on, but you get the point. I have no idea why these relatively modest asks should have divided Republicans and Democrats. I mean, really, a short extension of comment deadlines for what's widely acknowledged to be a complex undertaking? But that seems to happen a lot around here these days. Edmund Burke said in 1775 that all government, indeed every human benefit and enjoyment, every virtue, and every prudent act, is founded on compromise. Needless to say, Edmund Burke hadn't seen the FCC of 2014. Today's public notice contains proposals that unnecessarily layer even more complexity on top of the already complicated rules we adopted in May, as Commissioner Rosenworcel has adverted to. I wish parties the very best of luck if they plan to comment on them, because they're going to need it as they try to decipher what these proposals mean and how they're supposed to work. Today's public notice includes proposals that would discourage broadcasters from participating in the reserve auction and reverse auction, And it also contains proposals that would further manipulate the forward auction for the benefit of favored companies and further restrict the participation of disfavored ones. For these reasons, I dissent. Now, let's start with the reverse auction. Although I have a number of disagreements with the proposed reverse auction procedures, two are the most critical. First, I can't support the Commission's proposal to implement dynamic reserve prices. Instead of allowing the prices paid to broadcasters in the reverse auction to be determined by the laws of supply and demand, the Commission intends to intervene in the reverse auction process. Specifically, for certain television stations, the Commission will continue to offer lower the price offered, even when the station cannot feasibly be assigned a channel in its pre-auction band. So essentially, the FCC will try to get away with paying some broadcasters a below-market price. And what happens if the broadcaster won't accept that lower price and instead drops out of the auction altogether? Well, the Commission will have to change the band plan and assign that broadcaster a channel that will create more impaired spectrum. Now, it's easy to see why dynamic reserve prices are bad for broadcasters. And they mean lower compensation and thus could discourage broadcaster participation. But dynamic reserve prices are bad for other stakeholders as well. For wireless carriers, they would produce less cleared spectrum for purchase in the forward auction, and more of the spectrum that is made available would be impaired. But it's not just them. Unlicensed advocates, take note, because this could lead to less spectrum for unlicensed use. After all, the television stations that drop out of the auction due to dynamic reserve prices could end up being placed in the duplex gap or guard bands, limiting the entry points for unlicensed operations. Now, the purpose of dynamic reserve prices, as I understand it, is to try to save the Commission money by reducing payments to broadcasters that some might think are too high. But, in my view, the proposal is penny wise and pound foolish. Less cleared spectrum and more impaired spectrum will mean lower revenues in the forward auction. And policies that discourage broadcaster participation in the reverse auction jeopardize the entire auction's success. Speaking of policies that discourage broadcaster participation, my second principal objection to the proposed reverse auction procedures involves the opening price methodology. Now, to be sure, my preference would have been for the Commission not to get involved in the business of setting opening prices at all, and instead to leave that function to the market. But that ship sailed in May, so now, of course, we should focus on formulating the best possible methodology. To calculate the prices that will be offered to each station at the beginning of the reverse auction, the Commission proposes a formula that relies substantially on the population of a station's interference-free service area. Indeed, the formula only has two factors, one of which is population served. The formula does not take into account such things as the population of the markets where a station blocks other stations from being repacked. These omissions matter a lot, and here's why. Consider the example of College Station, Texas. The television station serving Aggieland has an interference-free service area covering about 330,000 people. That's not large in the grand scheme of things. But College Station is located within driving distance of Dallas, Houston, Austin, and San Antonio. If the College Station television station does not relinquish its spectrum rights during the spectrum auction, it will preclude certain stations in each of those large Texas markets from being repacked. And rest assured, the population of Texas's 4 largest metropolitan areas is a big deal in the grand scheme of things. The Commission's proposed opening price methodology, therefore, will undervalue the spectrum rights offered by stations in markets like College Station. My view is that the prices that we offer broadcasters in the reverse auction should be based on a station's preclusive effect in preventing the clearing of spectrum. Now, obviously, one factor in determining a station's preclusive effect is likely to be its interference-free service area. But that factor, however, is a relatively minor one, and it certainly shouldn't be responsible for 50% of the station's opening price. Once again, I worry that the Commission's proposal is motivated by a desire to underpay broadcasters, this time those in smaller markets. And once again, I worry that this proposal could ultimately jeopardize the success of the auction. I have serious concerns with the Commission's proposals with respect to the forward auction as well. Let's start with its implementation of its spectrum set-asides. Back in May, I dissented from the Commission's decision to create reserved and unreserved spectrum blocks based on the low band holdings of particular providers. I said at the time that attempting to manipulate the market by reducing competition in the forward auction would inject needless complexity into the auction process, reduce auction revenues, and result in less spectrum repurposed for mobile broadband. But again, I recognize that I was on the losing end of our May order. So, again, I approached this issue with the goal of finding the best way forward, given the existing framework. Unfortunately, again, my suggestions were rejected. As a result, at nearly every turn, the Commission's proposals forsake simplicity for unnecessary complexity, all for the purpose of rewarding certain companies and punishing others. How so? Well, to start, the Commission proposes to further skew the auction by setting aside only clean, unimpaired spectrum for bidding by preferred providers. And it proposes to do so by arbitrarily dividing the spectrum into what it calls Category 1 and Category 2 buckets, based on whether a license is more or less than 15% impaired. Here's how this would work, or not. Now, let's say in a given market we are auctioning 7 blocks of spectrum. It could be the case that 3 blocks of unimpaired spectrum would be set aside for certain companies, while their competitors would only be allowed to bid on 4 blocks of spectrum that are 49% impaired. And to state the obvious, this puts an even heavier thumb on the scale than our May decision, shaping outcomes and depressing revenues. The public notices efforts to engineer particular results don't end there. For example, when determining the number of blocks that the Commission will set aside, it proposes to count both the number of impaired and unimpaired blocks available in a market. But when it comes to deciding which blocks would actually be set aside, the Commission suddenly shifts course, recognizing that the blocks are not at all equal, and proposes to reserve only unimpaired blocks. And this just skews the auction in favor of creating more reserved spectrum. If spectrum isn't good enough to be set aside as reserved, then it shouldn't be counted for purposes of determining how much spectrum should be set aside. Other proposals, too, that are made today would simply add unnecessary layers of complexity to this auction. For example, the public notice proposes that one, but not both, of the two categories of licenses in the forward auction may, or may not, be split into two subcategories of licenses. Got that? So we would create three different categories of licenses for providers to bid on in some, but not all markets. And how would providers, how would express those bids? Well, not in a straightforward way, to say the least. The public notice's approach would require providers to select from a complicated mix of what it calls switch bids, all or nothing bids, and or simple bids, all of which could be implemented fully, partially, or not at all, depending on the circumstances. And that's just the clock round of the forward auction. The public notice's proposals for implementing the extended and assignment rounds suffer from many of the same flaws. For instance, the proposed assignment round process gives companies zero certainty that they could obtain the preferred blocks of spectrum, regardless of how much they bid. Now, stepping back from each particular proposal, I think it's important to look at the big picture. From the start of this proceeding, we have been sold a vision of a simple forward auction, where companies would be bidding on generic spectrum blocks. Anyone reading today's public notice must now realize that this vision was nothing but a mirage. The spectrum blocks offered in the forward auction are not going to be generic. They will have different levels of impairments and may be divided into three categories in the same geographic area. Instead of making one type of bid, which is standard in our auctions, companies will have to choose from among three types of bids without knowing how the Commission will process them. And the clock phase of our auction is just the first part. It might be followed by an extended round and will be followed by an assignment round. If this is the Commission's idea of simplicity, I'd hate to see its idea of complexity. At the end of the day, I hope that the Commission will be receptive to feedback from outside parties, more so than it was to my input. Otherwise, I fear that we are going to continue heading down the wrong path, one that leads to further delays, less broadcaster participation, less participation by wireless carriers, less revenue for the federal government, and ultimately less cleared spectrum for mobile broadband to the benefit of the American consumer. The shame is that, once again, we could easily have had a unanimous vote on today's public notice, but there was no interest in working toward consensus. Virtually every line drawn in this item was one color, red. Accordingly, I dissent.
Commissioner O'Reilly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As with the Commission's May incentive auction order, today's notice rushes forward in an attempt to put some of the pieces to this very important puzzle together. Yet it still lacks a solid foundation. Many of my concerns from the earlier item either still remain or have come to fruition. Although I requested several edits to this public notice to enable us to seek comment and have a fulsome record to base our decisions, they mostly fell on deaf ears. Rather than shore up our overall path, the Commission proposes a series of unnecessary, outcome-driven machinations and tentative conclusions to bolster its ability to claim success at the close of the auction. Some may say that the tentative conclusions are helpful to provide a plan that commenters can approve or disapprove. But experience shows that what you see proposed is essentially set in stone. In other words, the outcome of many of these issues seems predetermined. Hopefully I'm wrong, and the Commission will listen to the concerns of my fellow commissioners. I think the staff will realize there's more work to be done on this item. Sadly, at this point, I do not have confidence that the complex and confusing proposals in this public notice will maximize revenues or ensure that the spectrum goes to its highest valued use. First, how can anyone conclude that an auction is successful if close to 20% of Americans would be covered by impaired licenses? While we would all concede that some market variation may be inevitable, a nationwide impairment of an arbitrary number of 20% is both unsupported by any facts and would affect a large part of the country, and therefore too many American consumers. Additionally, discounting up to 20% of the American population is likely to deflate auction revenues. If impairment is to actually be retained and permitted, I sought that we actually have a number anchored in fact, based on projections of likely auction outcomes, but that was dismissed. Second, I strongly oppose the Commission's continued exploration of dynamic reserve pricing, which would only increase impairments and market variation. Under this system, a broadcaster who cannot be repacked in the TV band that accepts the Commission's offer would nonetheless see the price of their station drop. This is just plain wrong. A station that would cause impairments that agrees to go off the air for a certain price should be bought out. Instead, this broadcaster will be forced to either take a lower price or possibly drop out of the auction to be relocated to a spectrum channel that will be allocated for mobile wireless use. How does this provide certainty and comfort to broadcasters needed to be willing to participate in an auction that risks their livelihood? This idea should have been dumped months ago. Third, the Commission's generic licensing blocks are no longer truly fungible, as my colleague has highlighted. Auction participants will bid on two separate categories of licenses based on the amount of interference that the license may receive from broadcasters. The parameters for Category 1 and Category 2 licenses are not grounded in facts or data. Accordingly, I suggested that if separate categories of licenses are pursued, we seek general comment on what percentage of impairments should be used to define these two categories. That didn't make it either. Fourth, to add insult to injury, it is now proposed that the entities eligible for reserve licenses, which were created so that select participants could obtain sub-1 gigahertz spectrum at below market rates, will receive further preferential treatment by having greater access to license blocks with the fewest impairments. In effect, today's public notice doubles down on the proposal to provide extra benefits to a select subset of companies, many of which are in their predicaments due to the failure of past company decisions and not the role of the federal government to resolve. Simply put, under this proposal, reserved eligible entities would have access to licenses with the least interference. The largest companies would be relegated to bidding on impaired licenses. Why would anyone depress the bidding activity for the most valuable licenses? The least impaired licenses should be going for full market value. Fifth, the complexity of the forward auction structure may limit the ability of participants to bid vigorously for the spectrum. In their bidding plans, applicants will have to take into account the questionable extended and assignment rounds. Establishing such rounds means that bidders may hold back funds because it's unknown whether they will need to contribute more under these two bidding structures. Lastly, there are a host of other problems with this item, including the possibility that broadcast stations could be placed in the duplex gap or guard bands, as my colleague highlighted. Issues about how the reserve auction opening prices should be set, whether impairment discounts should be offered and how they should be calculated, and continued concerns about the final stage rule. These should have benefited from further comment instead of jumping to tentative conclusions. As I have said before, Congress challenged the Commission with a complex technical undertaking with this incentive auction. I do not minimize the efforts of staff in preparing this document. However, I must dissent from today's notice for all the above reasons. Fortunately, this is a notice and we still have time to get it right. Although my input is not reflected in this notice, I remain determined that this should be a collaborative process and the opinions of all should be considered. This auction is of utmost importance, and we must work with all interested parties to ensure success. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner. I think there is unanimity on this panel about one word: complexity. I think we've also seen with this item the reality that where you stand depends on where you sit. We have it.
Sorry, I didn't mean to. I apologize for interrupting.
This was a metaphorical reference. We do agree on complexity, though, right? Okay, so does that go on the list of things that we've agreed on? Okay. But the recognition here is that the people who are involved in this, on both sides of this, I don't care whether you're a seller or a buyer, everybody's out to maximize their position, and they should be. I mean, that's their responsibility to their stakeholders. But it also tends to fog the discussion. What is important is that this is a notice, as we've all said up here. We're seeking comments on proposals, not making final decisions. But I would make two observations in that regard. One is that I'm probably the only guy old enough to remember the old song, the thigh bone's connected to the hip bone. And if ever that was true, it's true in this item. Because there are multiple moving pieces, none of which, or few of which, move independently. So you make this decision here, it affects this here, and the balancing and the give and take and the connectivity between all of these issues is immense. And this group has done an excellent job in struggling with it. Secondly is that we hear a lot in this panel about process and about transparency, and it seems to me that at the heart of process and transparency is not, hey, tell me what you think. It's, this is the considered opinion at this point in time on which we're seeking your comment. That you shouldn't be hiding behind generalities. That it should be the job of an open and transparent commission to put forth for public comment its proposals in specific. And that is at the heart of what good process is all about. I would like to associate myself with the gentlelady on my right who talked about optimism about the process, and the gentlelady on my left who said this is a novel, thorny, and flat-out hard situation. And I do believe that this team that we have assembled here, in the good faith of the people on this panel, will be able to reconcile those two realities. So I will call for the vote. All in favor say aye. 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 Opposed? No. The ayes have it. Editorial privileges are granted. Let me see if there are any announcements that anybody wants to make. Commissioner Clyburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to take a few moments to acknowledge the outgoing members of my fall 2014 class of law clerks and thank them for their service and dedication to the work that we do here at the FCC. Christine Stanquist, if you're here, I know you are, a 3L from the University of Virginia Law School, was a full-time member of our staff. In a quiet and efficient way, Christine became a reliable hand when it came to drafting, editing, and research. With that bright smile and can-do spirit, her polished legal writing skills were recognized and seized upon by my legal advisor, who recognized that she was a quick study. Is a quick study. She was also a critical member of the team, helping to scour the record and fix footnotes and the inmate calling for the notice. Excited by all of this glamorous work, she applied to the FCC's honors program, and we hope to see her around portals this fall. Thank you. Ben Freeman, a 3L from American University, Washington College of Law, was our encyclopedic law clerk who could track down just about any answer to any question put before him. An unabashed political and Florida state fan, Mr. Chairman. Ben knew the backstories in Congress as well.
Everybody has a burden they have to carry.
I understand. If not better, he knew the legislative history. He made his mark as a go-to editor in the office, and he's also a devoted patron of the 12th street cafes, so much so that they know his order as soon as they walk into the door. So starting Monday, there will be one less turkey sandwich with, I believe, 2 slices of bacon on toasted sourdough that they will sell. I know they will miss you like we will. And Ashley Morse, who's not here, a 3L from Catholic University Columbus School of Law, was an FCC veteran when she walked in the office. She spent time in one of the bureaus at the APTA, NBC Universal, and at WUSA 9. She came to the team with a great set of skills and insights, which we quickly put to use on several of the media items she had a chance to work on this semester. And last but not least, Nellie Fusner, a 2L from George Washington University Law School, who came in the door saying, Mr. Chairman, I would love to work on spectrum issues. Who does that? Anyway, apparently she does. My wireless advisor thought he hit the lotto at that point. And if Nellie's last name sounds familiar, it's because she's a daughter of Bob Fusner, who spent 20 years at this agency and served as the chief of the private radio bureau. That apple certainly did not fall far from that tree. She did an excellent job reviewing wireless spectrum items, and she will also intern at the International Bureau next spring. I want to thank all of these young people and to let them know how much we've appreciated their good cheer, what a great capacity they have, and we're just so grateful, Mr. Chairman, for the good work. They have bright futures, and I wish them all the best.
And Nellie has proved that that spectrum can be a DNA-derived activity. Okay.
I thought you were going to say sexy, but that's
no.
okay.
Commissioner Rosenworcel has nothing, right? Okay. Commissioner Pye?
I got stuff.
Sorry. It's not what I meant to say. Yeah, not what I meant to say.
My voice lasted.
This is. And I didn't call you Lauren Bacall the whole time. Commissioner O'Reilly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a number of things I wanted to highlight real quickly, but first I should start by apologizing for interrupting your speech. It was impolite, and I'm sorry I got caught up by the moment, and it won't happen again. But
Can I interrupt you now? This is on the public record, you know.
I will try my best. I amend my statement. A couple things to bring to attention. One, we say goodbye in my office to our intern, Danielle Thuman, who's from Southwest Virginia, went to UVA, now is at Catholic Law, second year, and she previously interned in the Wireline Competition Bureau. We tend to have fewer interns in the O'Reilly office, but those that we do have are exceptional, and Danielle's been an exceptional help to us as well. I wish her well in the future and thank her so much for her hard work in our office. I did want to mention another topic. The communications industry is and lobby and friendship that we all face lost a couple of people this week, and not everyone here is commission centered, but I did want to bring the commission's attention to 3 people who just touched my life over the years on different aspects in communication that I had an opportunity to work with, and I just wanted to remember them. Susan Eade, who I know a number of people here know very well, who passed away not too distant. Jerry Hogan, a very good friend, who lobbied the Hill on a number of different issues. And then unexpectedly, my friend Bill O'Neill passed away this week, who worked for a number of different communications companies over the years. So 3 people that we lost in this season that I hope to remember and keep in my heart. Last, I would just say I wish a joyous holiday season to everyone as we head to different purposes, and thank the chairman for his indulgence.
Thank you, Commissioner, and thanks for keeping the memories of people alive. I have a couple of interns that we wanted to reference as well. We've had some great interns in the chairman's office this semester. 2 of the 3 have already fled, but one last. From a small, struggling university located in the Midwest and ranked 4th in the country. That is not TCU. Is Stephen Jakura, who today is his last day. He's currently a senior at Ohio State on a path to a PhD. in cybersecurity. If ever there is going to be anything that is going to be important and the guarantee of employment, it's that. Stephen has been working on cyber issues while he's been here. And Stephen, stand up so everybody can see you. But we're grateful to you and wish you the best going forward, and look forward to you coming back and introducing yourself as doctor. But Stephen was joined this semester by Leah Rabkin and Vanilla Cheng, our legal clerks, who, as I say, both have left. They're Georgetown 2L students. Fanella's last week was last week, and Leah, bless her heart, is continuing to support us even though she's moved on from New York. They were both particularly involved in media issues and working with Maria Kirby. So we look forward to hearing from all of them. And one of the great benefits of this agency is this incredible young talent that keeps moving through here. And what a great opportunity for all of us. If there are no further items, we will stand adjourned until. Oh no, you get to tell us that, don't you? I'm going to learn this role yet.
The next agenda meeting of the Federal Communications Commission is Thursday, January 29th, 2015.
And like I said, we stand adjourned until then. Thank you.
Congratulations, you've almost made it through the last meeting of the year. Take your seats. And I'll hand it over to the chairman.
Thank you, Kim. Hi, everybody. Moments ago, the commission took a final step towards rebooting how we connect our schools and libraries to the opportunities that 21st century technology represents. It's a win for our education system. It's a win for global competitiveness. And more importantly, it's a win for millions and millions of students who have access to expanded learning opportunities, particularly in rural and low-income communities. As you heard me say earlier today, about 2/3 of American schools, 40 million students, 2/3 of American schools do not currently have an internet connection that's capable of supporting modern digital learning. Today we took the action to change that. Today we voted to ensure that all of America's kids, no matter where they live, have the tools that they need to learn and compete in a global economy. I spent the last decade in the private sector as an investor. The E-rate order that we just approved is the most significant investment I've ever made in my professional life. It's an investment in the future of our children, an investment in the future of our nation. I meant what I said when I described it as a moral imperative for a generation. I look forward to seeing our company reap the rewards that this investment will bring in the years ahead. And before I take any of your questions, I'd like to make a few comments about the ongoing auction as well. While the bidding is not over, when the House Energy and Commerce Committee's leadership is issuing statements on the auction using the headline, "Boom," I think it's pretty safe to say that the auction is a success. And that boom headline, which was all caps and exclamation points, what is when it was only at $35 billion. And today, as you know, it's over $43 billion and continues to increase. And it's interesting to put that number in context because when the auction was first conceived, the expectation was it was going to be maybe 12, maybe 16 billion. And the reserve price for the auction, you'll recall, was set at like 10.6 billion. Again, the bidding is ongoing, and we should not be counting chickens before they hatch. But this auction will certainly raise enough to fully fund FirstNet, pay for the relocation of existing spectrum users, and make a significant contribution towards deficit reduction. Not to mention the fact that we're making 65 megahertz, a non-trivial contribution. 65 megahertz of spectrum available for flexible commercial use, which will help satisfy the continuing growing demand for wireless services. Not long ago, there were many saying this auction couldn't be done. I want to thank the members of the FCC staff for their years, literally years, of hard work. And in particular, Julie Knapp and the guy in the back row back there in the camel coat, John Leibovitz, who were the absolute dogged, work out the tough details in getting through this. And I also think that Julie and John would be the first to say that our partners in the government, including NTIA, and their responsibilities as spectrum coordinators, but especially the members of Congress, and especially the leadership on both sides, Chairman Upton, Waxman, Walden, Congresswoman Eshoo, and many others on that committee, along with Senators Rockefeller and Thune, worked hard to bring all of the parties together. And again, the job that Larry Strickling and his team at the White House, or at the NTIA did, the team that Tom Power did, or the work that Tom Power did at OSTP in the White House in just keeping, let's solve these issues, let's make this work. All of those people, the Congress, NTIA, the White House, and the great work of the FCC staff are what produced this success. And I also think that it is a classic example of the benefits of bipartisan government. And that bipartisan collaboration can produce these kinds of results. Congress directed the agencies to move forward in this auction in the 2012 Spectrum Act. After passage, as I said, the congressional staffs and the agency staffs worked hard behind the scenes to identify and coordinate spectrum. I think it's a powerful example. It's a textbook example of the success that a bipartisan approach brings to attacking common goals. And I hope it'll serve as a model for future efforts to make more spectrum available. One more observation before I turn to your questions. This is Ed Wyatt's last appearance at this event. He's leaving the New York Times after 20 years. That's a long time, but you're a young man, and we look forward to seeing what you do next, Ed. Some of you ought to go look at what Ed has up as his Twitter profile picture, a black and white picture of Ed sitting pounding at a manual typewriter. You had me at black and white, Ed. But it's got a cigarette in his mouth, pencil behind his ear. All you didn't have is the fedora with the press pass stuck in it. But seriously, you've been a tenacious reporter. Good luck. We're gonna stack the deck. You get the last question today. So, in the warm-up act for Ed's last question, let's start down here.
Trujillo with The Hill. I was hoping you could describe where the Commission is at in the rulemaking process for over-the-top videos and just what the broader points of the proposal are going to be.
I hope that we will be moving quickly on that. It's been on circulation. The concept is very simple. It's very similar to what Congress did, making sure that cable programming was available to satellites for distribution. We just want to make sure that programming is available on a platform agnostic basis.
Do you believe it's going to be approved or voted on in the next week?
I believe it'll be approved.
And on a unanimous vote? Or
so we get one question.
Oh, sorry. My first time, I apologize.
Hi, Caitlin Emma. I'm an education reporter for Politico. After the passage of the E-rate program, the E-rate funding cap boost, Commissioners Rosenworcel and Clyburn were talking about the need to modernize the Lifeline program and help get these students connected at home. So I was wondering if you could maybe talk about priorities there going forward, and work that you might be willing to take on in that space.
Well, and I think I said there are 3 votes up here for that. Yes, I mean Lifeline obviously is we work our way through the process. Lifeline is currently a voice-only service. We ought to make sure that it covers broadband.
Lydia Bayud, Bloomberg BNA.
Hi, Lydia.
After a year into your chairmanship and you've had sort of an implementation phase of your policy items and agenda, what are you looking to make any changes to or develop in 2015, and are there any sort of emerging issues that you think you might want to add to your agenda?
I think that we're on the same kind of course, with the network compact is something that is kind of the North Star, and it affects all of the activities of the Commission. So I think we're on the same path. Howard.
Monty Taylor, Daily. Commissioner Pai and O'Reilly both described their suggested edits for the comment PN as, innocuous and not being a big deal, and they both complained about there not being, none of their suggestions being taken. Why couldn't there be more compromise on the comment PN, and are you dismayed by the number of 3-2 votes this year? Or
So
this term?
the issue, am I dismayed on 3-2 votes? No, that's the way democracy works. The comment PN issue is I tried to address in my comments, and that is that many of their suggestions were don't put forward a presumption. I just think that's bad process, and that when you go out and say, hey, here's a Chinese menu of all these kind of things, tell us what you think, or just wide open, tell us what you think. I don't think that produces good results. But when you go out and say, hey, here's what we're thinking, this is what you want to shoot at, that is a far better way.
Thank you.
Hi, Nicole Dobo from the Hechinger Report. Commissioners Pai and O'Reilly mentioned that they don't think there are appropriate safeguards to make sure E-rate prioritizes funding for poor communities. Can you respond to that? Are there safeguards in place?
I think that they are perhaps engaging in hyperbole rather than fact. Yes, there are safeguards in place. Yes, there is a rural fiber gap. And yes, this program takes that on.
Hi, Lena Sully with Reuters. Hi. It's been 6 months since you've collected documents on interconnection from numerous content companies, ISPs. What can you tell us about what you've learned from them, and how do you plan to incorporate those findings into the net neutrality proceeding?
That's a good question that I don't want to respond to right now, but I understand what you're saying. Brendan.
Hi, Chairman. You had mentioned that it's going to take some time to look at the President's net neutrality proposal and consider all the things that Title II might include. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on including universal service fees on broadband?
So that's one of the issues that is out there being looked at. Let me be real clear. I want to make sure that, as I said last time that we were together, that we get the open internet done, the open internet item done, that we get it done fast, that we get it done right, and that we get it done permanently. We're on course and speed to do that. Gotham.
Mr. Chairman, you gave a speech this September at 1776.
I'll deny that I was there.
Outlining your belief that there is not sufficient competition in the market for high-speed broadband for most citizens.
Yep.
What is the solution to that, and would further consolidation among high-speed broadband providers exacerbate that problem?
Could you be talking about anything in specific, Gotham, or is this just a conjecture that you dreamed up this morning?
I believe there are some dynamics out there that might be influenced by this.
So our position has always been competition. And we will look at all proposals put forth to us in terms of how they support that concept. Brian.
Hi, Mr. Chairman. Can you respond to Verizon CFO's comments earlier this week suggesting that Verizon's investment in its network would not be affected by an FCC move to Title II on the open internet?
I wasn't surprised by it. I mean, so let's just kind of the ADOS 3 auction is at these incredible levels, despite the fact that I went to CTIA and said, at the CTIA annual meeting in September, and said, I think it's pretty hard to carry 55% of the internet and not be subject to open internet, despite the fact that I've been talking about Title II all along, including Title II being part of the hybrid proposal that we were floating, and despite the fact that the President has said what he said about Title II. So I think those all fit together. So when Verizon makes that kind of a statement, I mean, I think it's logical. I think it's reflected in what various Wall Street analysts have said in terms of Title II being less of a bugaboo if it's done correctly, and I think it is also, in a greater sense, reflective of the world that Verizon's been living in. Section 332 of the Communications Act specifically says that wireless will be treated as a common carrier, but that the Commission shall forbear from the vast majority of common carriage sections of Title II, except for 201, 202, and 208. So for 20 years, Verizon Wireless, AT&T and Wireless, all the wireless carriers have been living under Title II with appropriate forbearance, and have been able to raise and invest hundreds of billions of dollars and build a mobile network that's the envy of the world. So again, I just think this is all in keeping with that kind of a background. We're skipping over you, Brooks.
So, do you have a timetable for the open internet order?
I think I said that I want to do it quickly, I want to do it right, and I want to do it sustainably.
So, February, March?
Quickly, right, sustainable. Is that the? Here it is. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, this is kind of like, making his last appearance in center field. And this had better be good after this build-up.
Think that Baylor deserved to be in the Final Four rather than...
So, Ed, you may notice that I don't have strong feelings on many things, but on that I really do have strong feelings. And I think that when you can win with your backup to the backup quarterback, against the number 2 defense in the country and the number 1 rusher in the country, and do it by 59-0, there is no question at all the committee was right.
Okay.
Now, would you like a real
I
question?
have a serious question.
Did you like that answer?
I did.
Huh?
I did. Well, except for the Baylor part.
Except for the Baylor part.
Given the high-profile nature of the net neutrality proceeding, do you think it calls for you to make, when you reach a decision and start circulating an item, to make a public statement about what you've decided to pursue and why?
Oh, I think that what you've seen in the way we handle things is that we try and explain, what the thought process is, and I wouldn't expect that would be different this time around. Does that mean you're going to still be covering us in the very near term when we do this?
Would you like to place a little wager on that Ohio State-Alabama game?
Brooks, I am told that in a federal building, it is some kind of a statutorily verboten. But you, sir, if you would like to step outside. Thanks, everybody. Have a great holiday, everybody. Thank you.
We have people from the bureaus available here if there are additional questions, so we would do it in order of the meeting, which would be E-rate to begin with. Any questions from the press on E-rate? Okay, all right, we have one, so I guess that would be John and the team. Okay, 2, all right.
Hi, Nicole Dobo from the Hackinger Report. Could you talk a little bit more about the ability of schools to build their own networks? When it seemed if it's not cost effective, they can build their own. Is that right?
Right. So what the commission adopted today essentially makes a self-constructed network, self-constructed connection, an eligible E-rate service, just like asking for a regular connection from, say, the local carrier is today. It is subject to, I'm just going to say, all of the core E-rate program safeguards, but the simplest and most fundamental one is it has to be shown to be the most cost-effective way to meet the desired service level. And I think the best way to illustrate that is, an E-rate a school or whatever group of schools is applying, you put out a RFP for bid. To qualify for this, you would have to solicit bids from also, say, the local carrier. If that was an option, you couldn't just say, I only want to do this. And so we'll have to really see what kind of proposals come in, who chooses to use it. But I think just the nature of safeguards, the expectation is that by far the most straightforward example where this would be found to be cost effective is if there is no existing network. And so there was a survey that was done that's in the record that said 6% of schools seeking high-speed bids get no bids. So that would be an easy one where we want to have a tool so that those schools have something to turn to. But certainly I think our expectation is that will be, a small number of schools will need to do that, but we think it's a really important tool for those who do.
Terry Murakami from Communications Daily is part of the self-provisioning part, a response to what the chairman was talking about, with the situations where one school district pays like 10 times as much as the next school district over. Is that part of the rationale too?
Right. So I'll just quote our boss a minute ago. Competition. So that same survey that said 6% get none, that same survey found I think it's 26%. So they only get one bid. And I think E-rate pays a healthy subsidy, but you as the local school district still have to pay a portion of it. your portion of it, if it's an old, maybe you're paying $500 a month for slow speed, not that big of a deal. If the bid, though, is $10,000 a month, $15,000 a month, which is what we see in some cases today, the idea of having other tools so that you as the school buyer can maybe get some competition going in your bidding, that's what the chairman was referring to around options and how that relates to affordability.
So it's 6% get no bids and 26% get one bid.
Right. That was from the COSIN survey that was it's in the record and it was released in late October.
Gotcha. And in terms of the Wi-Fi funding, is the press release was saying it gives more certainty by extending the 5-year commitment to like 2019, but it's 5 years from now. So I was curious.
That's right. Yeah. So it's the same rules that were adopted in July, but in July they were just in place for the next 2 funding years. This order extends them 3 more. So for the next 5, starting the 15, which opens in a month, through the funding year 19, that's how internal connection support will be provided under those rules that were adopted in July.
So 5 years versus 2 years.
Correct. That's right. From 2 to 5. Yes.
Okay. I'm sorry. One follow-up. If a school district has access to a connection but it's slow, are they only competent? Does that matter? Like, could they say, what we have is too slow, therefore we would like to build our own, or is that?
Well, I think that is what the dynamic will look like, because as the chairman referenced, maybe a third, so 64% or 63% was the number he used.
Right.
So that's the number of schools today that the data show really are not. A lot of those have internet access, but not at the 100 megs today, scaling to a gigabit within 5 years that we've adopted as targets. And so, right, the idea is local school board says we want to upgrade our network connectivity. The bid we'll put out will now be not for our old 10 megabit connection. It'll be for 100 megs.
Okay.
And if the existing providers can provide that at a good price, our expectation is they'll probably just keep doing it. But if the response back is, well, it's not available or it costs a lot, some of the other tools then come into play.
Is that it? Okay, thank you. All right, any questions on the Connect America Fund item? Okay, we have 1, 2, okay.
Hi, Carol Maddie.
Lydia Bayard, Bloomberg BNA. Can you give any insight into what the thinking was to increase the program availability from 5 to 6 years with an option for 7? But and was that some sort of compromise between what some industry groups were asking for 10? What was the Bureau's thinking there?
That's right. We viewed that was a reasonable compromise to provide additional years of support in recognition that the speed standard had been increased, which would require more investment. But we were not persuaded that it was necessary to extend the term to 10 years, as some had argued in the record.
Thank you.
That was my question. Can you explain the forbearance thing?
What do you want to know about it?
I don't really know.
You want me to explain what forbearance means?
I know what forbearance means, but what's the forbearance thing that Clyburn was?
Sure. The Commission is forbearing from enforcing the obligation of recipients of Connect America Fund support to offer voice service in 3 types of areas. The first area are low-cost census blocks. That would be places that are not expensive to serve. The second would be areas that are served by an unsubsidized competitor. And the third would be areas that are served by another eligible telecommunications carrier. And specifically, this is a continuation of the framework that the Commission had adopted in 2011 to target support and the obligations to more narrowly defined geographic areas, to target both the support and the obligations to high-cost areas of the country where there are no other providers offering the services that the Commission requires them to provide. And I should mention, the Commission did not forbear from the obligation to offer lifeline service to low-income consumers, and providers are not allowed to exit the market without complying with the Section 214 discontinuance processes.
Thank you.
I think we are on to incentive auctions. Monty, you have a question? Okay, we have a question.
Oh, thank you. Monty, Com Daily. I just wanted to see the pricing stuff in here, the DRP and the population being half of it. Are those tentative conclusions in the PN?
The PN itself is a proposal, so the whole thing in some sense is a proposal. The whole thing is a tentative conclusion. But as the chairman said, it's much better to have specifics than it is to have general. So the answer to your general question is it is a proposal. But there are specifics. DRP makes a specific proposal. The 50% interference, 50% POPs is a proposal that is in the comment PN.
And then my other question is, the chairman, he described everything as being interconnected and said that, if you wiggle one thing, you're going to be wiggling a lot of things. That may be a paraphrase. But I was just wondering.
He usually uses a Rubik's Cube.
Yeah, he may have been a Rubik's Cube. Then can you tell me, to me it sounded like he was sort of talking about DRP. And can you explain to me what, since everybody's mentioning all the opposition to this concept, what taking that out would, I don't know, what would fall down?
What DRP is a way of allowing us to do is to have higher opening prices. Okay, we don't have to, it's corner cases. I think as he described it, it is potentially a case where we need maybe some more money for a larger city. Even though you talk about a suburb or college station, you may need Austin or a station in a larger market anyway. And so the corner cases or a holdout case, this is a narrow way to take care of that, so we can, in more general, offer stations higher opening bids. So in that sense, they're interconnected. And to us, that proposal will increase the chances of success of the overall auction.
So if you took that out, it's your position that you would have to have a lower opening bid to broadcast.
Well, you look at the comment PN, and the PN does make that point, is that DRP allows us to have a higher opening bid prices.
That's all I got. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you.